Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Awakened the Ancient Power Within. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details, and go to the story link to say hi to the author. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. This is the story that I wrote for We the Celestials, like with Shield Hero, which I am also posting on this site as well as AO3. I am in the process of turning my scripts that I wrote for them into story format, as many of these stories will never be finished and seen on YouTube. I believe right now, they are expecting people to pay to hear the half-finished audio work, rather than seeing it for free on YouTube. Good news is I don't have to worry about word limits and the like. A long, long time ago, there was a great war, unlike anything seen before with human eyes. For this was not a war waged between the nations of man, but rather the divine as a three-way conflict between God and his angels, the devils, and the fallen angels ranged across the heavens as well as the earth. All to see who would, in the end, take control over the world. Then, one day, from out of the blue the war was interrupted by two great dragons. No one knew why they were fighting. All they knew was that the two great beasts cared not where they took their brawl. They fought wherever they pleased, including on the battlefield of the Great War. And when the three great powers tried to get them to stop, or to take their own battle somewhere else, the two dragons became enraged, for it is not wise to get in the middle of a fight between dragons. Eventually, the three leaders of the great factions called a pause to the war in order to deal with the two dragons. The three stood there, united in a single cause, as the dragons bared their fangs and claws at them. The two great beasts attacked, aiming to eat the heads of the leaders of heaven, hell, and the fallen angels. Yet, despite their power rivaling that of gods, the two dragons were defeated. Their bodies were cut into pieces and their souls sealed into humans as what would later be called sacred gears. These sacred gears, or God's artifacts, allowed the humans who received them to enact miracles on earth. Since that day so long ago, many different humans have held within the powers of these sacred gears, each one of them making their mark in the pages of history, becoming legends. Yet, no matter how long time flowed, the desire to do battle between these dragons never ceased. It seemed that, without fail, the hosts of the sacred gears would seek the other out to fight. Though that conflict never changed, the world around them did. The human race, which had only ever received supernatural powers from various sacred gears sprinkled into the masses, would eventually gain powers of their own without the need of the divine. This change began with the arrival of the glowing baby in China. From there, powers known as quirks began to spread all over the world, with 80% of the population having at least some sort of power. From there, the world changed into something straight out of the comic books, as the impossible was made a reality. However, the same could not be said for one Izuku Midoriya. "Where do you think you're going, Deku?" yelled Katsuki Bakugo, his voice ringing through the classroom, followed soon by the sound of a loud explosion before dark smoke filled half the room. A cry of pain rang through the air as the class heard someone rolling on the ground, their bag and books getting scattered all around before the boy hit the back wall of the classroom. As the smoke cleared, most of the students looked on with mild interest as Bakugo, the one who had caused the explosion, grabbed his target by his uniform jacket and pulled him up to his feet. Some even began smirking, leaning back in their seats as Bakugo towered over the trembling form of a green-haired boy with diamond-shaped freckles. No one said anything as frightened tears began forming in Izuku's eyes, letting out a yelp as Bakugo's right hand slammed onto the boy's shoulder, gripping it tightly as the sound of several small pops could be heard, as well as the sight of smoke rising up between the boy's fingers. But nobody in the room rushed to his defense, nor did they even bother to find a teacher to put an end to this. After all, why should they? Izuku Midoriya was quirkless, a person born without any sort of superhuman ability. What was strange was that he should have gotten one of his parents' quirks, or a combination of both. Yet, he had nothing. Thus, as the nickname Bakugo gave him all those years ago stated, he was useless. A Deku. But, despite this fact, Izuku had a dream. One which all the students in Aldera Middle School had mocked Midoriya forever since the day he had been declared quirkless. And it was this dream that enraged Bakugo. "You were there, weren't you?" screamed Bakugo, his face inches away from his targets. Izuku flinched due to both the volume and the spit flying right into his face. "At the UA mock exam for the hero course. Don't you dare lie to me, you damned worthless nerd. I overheard some of those extras talking about you while I was in the bathroom. Talking about some mumbling freak taking notes on everyone he saw. You really think you can compete against me?" "NN no K Kaken," stammered Izuku in both panic and pain. I'm really not trying to compete against anyone. Honest. As Bakugo glared at the teen with explosive fury, a few members of the class laughed aloud. It was just so absurd that, no matter what people told him, Midoriya refused to learn the simple truth that he could never, ever become a hero. He had no quirk, no strength of his own. Sure, some schools like UA had eased up on their acceptance policies into hero courses and allowed those with no quirks to enter, but nobody actually believed that there was a quirkless person out there that could succeed in getting in. It was all for the publicity. But no matter how many times these simple facts were told to him, Izuku Midoriya refused to back down from his dream of becoming a hero. If only he would just give up, then maybe he wouldn't be bullied so much. And there was nobody who bullied Izuku more than his former childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo, who had been blessed with an amazingly powerful and flashy quirk, practically making it his destiny to become a great hero. Something that he liked to remind his classmates of whenever the opportunity arose, much to their chagrin. To have someone like Izuku even consider climbing to the same heights as Bakugo angered the teen like nothing else. You really think you, a quirkless loser, can get into UA? Bakugo continued to yell, new veins appearing on the sides of his head as he did. I'm sick and tired of you looking down on me, Deku. I'm going to remind you of your place once and for all. Maybe this will get it through your damned head. As Bakugo pulled back his left arm, a larger explosion than the normal pops he would make when bullying Midoriya erupted, causing the class to become deathly silent. Tension now filled the air as many of those watching now wished they were somewhere, anywhere else, as they could tell this wasn't like what Bakugo had done in the past. Normally, Bakugo would verbally assault the green-haired teen and use his explosions to either knock Izuku against a wall or as intimidation. The blonde bomber wasn't stupid. Always in control of the force of his explosions to make sure he didn't leave any lasting damage or cause enough harm that would get him barred from entering any hero school. But now, that explosion he just used would surely be enough to leave Midoriya with burn marks on his face. Possibly even scars. Was the mere fact that Izuku was not just talking about entering UA, but actually making a physical effort to get in enraging Bakugo this much? Or was this a case of the straw that broke the camel's back? Either way, Midoriya was going to be in a world of hurt. And the quirkless boy knew it as well. Still feeling the heat on his face from that last blast. Oh no, 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 thought a panicking Izuku. He's really lost it this time. Kaken's really going to kill me. And nobody's going to save me. I have to do something. Izuku's body trembled out of control, more tears forming in his eyes as the inevitable seemed to slow down before him. He could make out every bead of nitro sweat on his bully's open palm as it seemed to gather to create another large blast. He could see the motion of Bakugo pulling his arm back, getting ready to slam his hand into Izuku's face. If only he had some sort of quirk that could help him. A strength enhancement to help him break free of the grasp. A reflection quirk to just redirect the blast. A warping quirk so that he could be anywhere else. Heck, he'd even settle for a slime quirk so that he could just melt out of Bakugo's grip and escape through a crack in the wall or under the door. Only, he had none of those. As Bakugo's hand began moving closer to him, something awoke within Izuku. Perhaps it was just his fight or flight instinct, the voice of his desire to take flight finally going hoarse and allowing fight to be heard. Perhaps it was just his desire to not be a victim of this anymore, having finally reached his limits. Or it could just be the knowledge that no matter what he did, he was going to get hurt, so he might as well try and fight back. So, Izuku reached out with his dominant left hand to grab Katsuki's wrist. An act that, at first, startled the blonde. Then, like clockwork, Bakugo became angrier. But Izuku did not back down as a strange feeling began moving through his body and into his hand. This feeling, this power, began to shift and change rapidly around his hand, making him feel like his hand was changing into something clawed. Only it wasn't. It was still the same hand that Izuku used to take all his hero notes. Just a bit brighter. Then, Izuku heard a voice in the back of his mind. About time you did that, came a booming, powerful, and somehow ancient voice that seemed to echo all around him. I was beginning to wonder if you would ever stand up for yourself. Now let us take his power for our own. Divide. Izuku's shout, along with a bright blue light coming from Izuku's left hand, caught the blonde bomber off guard, his wrist twisting so that his palm faced his victim while letting out an explosive blast. However, compared to previous explosions, this one wasn't all that bad. It had force behind it, but only enough to compare to a powerful wind that would make walking a tad more strenuous. As for the heat, it wasn't the searing heat Izuku had known for so many years, but rather simple warmth. What's more, Izuku felt a surge of power running through him like nothing he had ever felt before. The sugar rush he felt when he was a little kid and had eaten 12 All Might limited edition chocolate bars had nothing on this. "Why are you just standing there?" demanded the voice. "Quick! Use the energy boost to take this whelp down before he recovers." Izuku blinked as the voice rang through his head once more, noticing at the same time a shocked Bakugo trying to escape from the young Midoriya's grasp. Yes, trying. Bakugo, the strongest person in their class, was struggling to free himself from Izuku's grip. Instinct took over again, Izuku flinging Bakugo's arm to the side like it was the easiest thing in the world before bringing his arm back to elbow the mighty Bakugo right in the face. Izuku watched as the ashen blonde spun in the air slightly before crashing to the ground, where he then rolled into a nearby desk. For a moment, Izuku stood there as he breathed hard until he realized what he had just done. He had just knocked Bakugo down like it was nothing. And what was scary about it all was just how easy it had all been. Like something had sapped away most of the bully's strength. And how did he move that fast? Slowly looking up, Izuku began to sweat as he realized the entire class was watching him with wide-eyed expressions. Just then, someone gave his flight instinct a glass of water, for it screamed at him to run. To put as much distance between him and everyone else as possible, because, when Bakugo got up, well, Izuku didn't need to finish that thought as he grabbed all his stuff from the floor before hightailing it out of there at full speed. What just happened? What just happened? What just happened? This single sentence was on an infinite loop, the green-haired teen asking this over and over again as he ran at full speed back to his home. Once inside the apartment, he locked the door before heading to his own room, where he leaned his back against the door. His legs felt weak, his uniform now drenched in sweat from that epic run with no breaks. His hands jittered as he allowed his backpack to drop to the floor. Then, slowly, Izuku sank to the floor with his back never leaving the door. The body could feel his body crashing, the burst of energy he had gained with his fight with Bakugo having vanished shortly after he left the classroom. He had called on every reserve of energy he had in his being, and then some just to keep running. To put as much distance between him and his bully. And now, with his body finally crashing, all the teen was left with were his thoughts. So, as he sat there, his mind tried its best to piece together what had happened. Had someone used their quirk to save him? He was quirkless after all, so that made sense. Perhaps a teacher or another student. That thought was quickly struck down though. Logically, if there was a teacher nearby, they would have stepped in to put a stop to it themselves, rather than using their quirk and getting in trouble. Also, Izuku knew the quirks of all the teachers at his middle school. Heck, he even knew the quirk from that substitute teacher who had come from the nearby town of Kyo. And none of the other students he was aware of had a quirk that could give someone else power like that. Did that mean? Did he dare hope? Heart pounding, Izuku crawled on the floor to get to his desk. As much as his body protested, demanding that he lay there for a few hours or days, Izuku forced himself up and onto his chair before pulling out a notebook. One whose title on the cover was written in crayons. Hero Analysis of Izuku Midoriya. His hands trembled, now with excitement as he opened the first page, seeing that it was mostly empty save for a single word that he had written so long ago. Quirkless. Around that word were several stains created from the tears that had been pouring down from his eyes. New watermarks threatened to join them, but Izuku managed to hold them back. Finding a spot below that word, Izuku brought the tip of his pen to the line. Then, he took a deep breath to calm his nerves before beginning to write. As Izuku wrote down his theories on what he believed his quirk might be, someone else was looking through the teen's eyes. Or, rather, something. This being deep within Izuku watched on in silence as Izuku's pen flew over the page, noting the meticulous way the boy was breaking down how his quirk worked. He may not have had the same level of brilliance as his former host, but the boy was no slouch. With time, he would become a worthy vessel. However, when the teen wrote down that his quirk might be causing him to hallucinate voices, the being within Izuku could no longer keep quiet. "I can assure you I am no mere hallucination," stated the voice. The suddenness as well as the power behind these words caused Izuku to jump in his chair, his pen being flung into the air. Briefly, the teen looked around, trying to see if there was anyone around, only to then realize that he had heard that voice before. In school. And in his head. Okay, I'm still hearing voices," said Izuku aloud as he tried to make sense of everything. "I hope that this is because of my quirk. Like some sort of side effect." "I am neither a side effect, nor am I a quirk," grumbled the voice. "Oh, okay. Then what are you?" asked the teen, wondering where this would go. "My name is Albion, the White Dragon Emperor," was the reply, its tone holding no small hint of pride. "Also known as the Vanishing Dragon. Long ago, I was defeated by the leaders of the three great powers before having my soul and power sealed away into what would be later known as scared gears. Think of them as superpowers before the age of what you call quirks. Izuku sat there, listening to the voice now known as Albion, taking in what it was saying before coming to the most logical conclusion. So I guess I must have a sentient quirk then, said the boy, excitement slowly growing in his voice. It would have to have some ability to think in order to make up such a story. I have heard about the existence of such quirks, but I never thought that I would actually have one. Albion, in response, just let out a sigh. I should have realized that words alone might not be enough to convince you. Perhaps a demonstration of my powers are in order. Before Izuku could say or do anything, that same strange feeling he had before he activated his quirk began moving through his body and into his left hand. With wide-eyed fascination, Izuku watched as his left hand began to glow blue, hoping to see his quirk in action again so that he could have more notes. He had expected a great many things to happen, like the power in the room dwindling or the batteries in his devices having their energy lives cut in half, and then feeling a great charge of power. What he didn't expect was for his left hand to become a white, clawed gauntlet with a blue gem on the back of his hand. Now witness me in my original form. Izuku sat there shocked as the voice he had been hearing in his head was now coming from the blue gem. But before he could dwell on that, the room around him vanished only to be replaced by scattered white clouds within a seemingly endless blue sky. Then, rising from below, was a dragon. A large Western-style dragon with white scales so beautiful that they seemed to glow along with blue eyes, 2 golden horns on top of his head, and feathered wings that reminded him of an Aztec god he had once read about. And as Izuku sat there, staring into the blue eyes that stared right back into his own, he could feel the power of this great beast that dwarfed him in every way possible. A power that was real. This dragon was real. There was no way his quick could do what it did back at school and show him all this. With that, Izuku found himself back in his room, having never left his seat with the blue gem now embedded in his left hand. So, it's true, whispered Izuku as the truth began to set in. I don't have a quirk. Everything that happened back in that classroom was because of you. As Izuku stared at the gem, he could feel his heart pinching in the most painful of ways, while tears began to form in his eyes. It was like the world's cruelest joke. To have him think that, after all these years, he finally had a quirk, that he could finally be a hero, only to find out it was a lie. He didn't blame Albion since he probably didn't intend to get Izuku's hopes up, just wanting to protect his host or something like that. You are wrong, human, said Albion firmly, instantly getting Izuku's attention. When your soul was created, the scared gear divine dividing was fused into it, becoming one with you. Its power became your power. When you stood up for yourself and tried to fight back, your subconscious called upon it. All I did was offer some brief guidance. The despair that Izuku felt quickly morphed into confusion as he continued to stare at the gem. Then why couldn't use this power before? I mean, Kaken used to beat me up all the time when we were kids. The main reason was that your body was too weak to handle the transfer of power, Albion responded with a sigh. Most of the assumptions you made in your notes are correct. Divine dividing is a power that transfers half of the strength and powers of your opponent before adding what was stolen to your own abilities. With this power, you will always be at your peak while your enemy gets weaker faster. However, when you were younger, your body could not handle the strain of taking in the stored power. As such, you were unable to use divine dividing. Izuku's eyes widened at that. And now I am strong enough? Izuku asked, his voice full of hope. Ha ha. Just barely. And I'm being generous here, laughed Albion, causing Izuku's head to drop. In truth, what you saw on your hand was just the first stage of divine dividing. A half-awake form, if you will. In order to gain access to my full power, your body is going to need to become stronger. For a moment, Izuku felt himself deflate at Albion's statement of him being weak. Not that it wasn't true. He was built like a straw man after all. It was, well, he had hoped that this quirk would be able to change that. Make him stronger so that he could become a hero. Yet, a moment later, Izuku's eyes brightened as he realized what Albion was saying. If this was just what the bare minimum of divine dividing could do, just imagine what it would be capable of once he grew stronger. The full access to everything that Izuku felt when he saw Albion in his true form. Just imagine how many people he could save with that sort of strength. Quickly turning back to his notebook, he began writing ideas at a frantic pace. All right, began Izuku over the scribbling of his pen, jotting down his plans. So, first off, I'm going to need to register divine dividing as my quirk. That will give me time to figure out what sort of training I should be doing to boost my overall physical abilities. Let's see, I could try getting a bunch of weight and using them. Maybe even jogging with weights. I heard that helps with some people. Or I could look online for a workout program. Wait, maybe join a dojo or a gym. That might actually kill two birds with one stone. What are you thinking, partner? Asked Albion. Grinning, Izuku pulled out his phone and began typing in his search, while barely noting the fact that he was being called partner. Well, the way I see it, I not only need to be able to handle this strength, but also how to use it to its full advantage, explained Izuku. Meaning I'm going to need to learn how to fight. A dojo will not only help me improve my strength and stamina, but also teach me how to fight. I might not be able to go blow to blow with someone who has been studying for years, but I'll at least get the basics down before taking the UA entrance exam. The same goes for a gym. They'll be able to provide a number of different workout classes, as well as some self-defense classes or kickboxing. As Izuku began looking up the nearby gyms to see what sort of classes they offered, and how much, Albion grinned. His newest host was certainly interesting. So, this is the place you have chosen. Izuku nodded as Albion's words echoed through his head, standing stiffly at the entrance of the dojo waiting for someone to greet him. Waiting to meet the person who could give Izuku the training he needed to better handle divine dividing, and become the hero he always wanted to be. It had been a day and a half since Izuku had first communicated with the dragon dwelling inside of him. During that time, Izuku had researched every gym, dojo, training program, and personal trainer he could find on the web. He examined everything with the same level of scrutiny that he gave when examining heroes' quirks and their potential. From their hours of operations, the various types of training they provided, equipment, lesson plans, and even who the instructors were. Well, all that as well as making sure that it was within his family's budget. When Inko had returned home the day Izuku had awakened his quirk, the young man had rushed over to her before she could close the door to their apartment to tell her the good news. Naturally, she was a little bit skeptical that he had just now awakened a quirk, since such things were very rare. As in, she could count on one hand the number of times she knew it had happened from all the research she had done back when Izuku was little and still awaiting his quirk. But after having Albion's gem appear on the back of his left hand, and using his divide on her, Inko was sold. That night, emotions ran high as both Midoriyas broke down in happy tears. Even more so when the Midoriya matriarch sent a quick text message to her husband, who then, after only a few minutes of receiving the text, called Izuku to congratulate him. After a long talk with his dad, Izuku put his phone on speaker in order to reaffirm his desire to become a hero and ask for their support. "All right, we'll support you as best we can," said Izuku's father over the phone, his voice, though happy, sounding a little tired, as if he were struggling to stay awake. "But only as long as you keep your grades up," added Inko. "I know you have a lot of catching up to do, and there's not a lot of time before the entrance exam for UA, however. That's no reason for you to neglect your studies in the name of pushing yourself." With that promise easily made, Izuku was given his price range. Within the time between then and his mother taking him to get his quirk registered, Izuku had crossed off a number of potential training options. Most of the personal trainers were out, since each of the sessions would cost the same as the monthly training allowance. The same went for certain gyms run by former heroes, though that had more to do with the fact that they were just using their slowly dying name recognition to score some easy cash. At least, that's what Izuku came to after reading the very negative reviews and comments made about these places. Thankfully, there were a few good ones out there. Some even offered hero-in-training courses for people his age that would allow quirk training under their supervision. Oh, yes, that was very tempting for Izuku. In the end, Izuku ended up choosing a dojo without a lot of reviews, good or bad, that was close to the higher end of his budget. To anyone else, this might have seemed like a huge mistake on his part. But Izuku had his reasons. The first was the man who ran the dojo. While he was never a hero, at least not one Izuku or the internet knew of, the man had studied and mastered many martial arts from all over the world. In fact, he was so skilled that some hero agencies would contact him in order to train their sidekicks. He also boasted that he could help people find the fighting style that fit his students the best. Not only that, but if you were willing to put in the work, he would help you create your own style. Now that was something that would greatly help Izuku. Another reason Izuku wanted to go here was because of the rooftop parkour classes that you could sign up for. Albion had explained to him that the more he used divine dividing, the more it would drain his stamina. The only reason he hadn't felt it when he used it on Kakin, or that whelp as Albion liked to call him, was because of the adrenaline rushing through his system. meaning that if Izuku was going to be in situations where he would need to use divine dividing multiple times, then it wouldn't matter how strong he kept his body if he passed out. What's more, after doing some research into the subject, Parker seemed like it would be ideal for hero training. Not only would it give him a full body workout, but it would help increase his bone strength and endurance. And that was just how it would improve his body. How many times had he watched heroes leaping from building to building as they tried their best to get to the scene of a villain attack or other disasters, or use the surrounding area in a fight? The more Izuku thought about it, the more he began to realize that taking up Parker would help him improve as a hero. There were a few other things that he found in his research that Parker was supposed to help him with. Some of it he could believe, while the rest, well, he just didn't. Like, he could see how leaping from rooftop to rooftop, jumping from one wall to the next in order to climb upward, lunging from railing to railing would help improve his quick thinking, creativity, and even help him with a fear of heights. However, he still wasn't sold on how this would improve self-confidence and reduce antisocial behavior. So now, here he was, dressed in a plain white shirt and jeans as he looked around at the seemingly empty dojo. The place looked and felt bigger than it did in the photos, with a wide empty place in the middle to train. Looking up, Izuku saw that the room had a second story that only had a catwalk where people could stand and look down as they watched bouts. That, or they could also be used in some extreme matches. Also on the catwalk was a pretty girl who, Izuku's brain needed a moment to reboot as his eyes focused on the sight before him. There, standing on the railing, was a very pretty girl dressed in a white gi. Her orange hair was tied to the side in a ponytail, while her eyes were hidden behind a blindfold as she continued to walk on the catwalk. Every once in a while, the girl would do a cartwheel, making the boy's heart race with fear that she would fall and break her neck. But such things never happened, as she just moved with what seemed to him like calculated grace with each move. Finally, after making 2 laps around the second floor, the girl leaped toward the ground. Twice she spun around before she landed, punching the ground as she did so as if it were the finishing move in a video game or something. Then, she stood up. As the girl untied the blindfold from her eyes, she shook her hair slightly, giving it that brief wavy motion that reminded Izuku of the brilliant orange leaves billowing in the fall wind. And when he saw her eyes, Izuku couldn't help but gulp as his face turned red at seeing those teal eyes beaming with life and pride. Eyes that soon fell upon him. "Hey there," said the very pretty girl in the friendliest voice any girl had ever spoken to him in. "Didn't hear you come in. Are you here to sign up at our dojo?" As the girl gave him a friendly smile, all Izuku could do was stand there as a strangled, almost whimpering noise escaped his throat. A girl was talking to him. Not mocking or laughing at him, but talking to him like a normal teenager. And she was smiling at him so warmly. His brain didn't know how to process this, and was on the verge of needing to be rebooted once more. So all he could do was stand there, stiff as a board with his eyes wide. This, naturally, didn't go unnoticed by the girl as her smile became a bit forced. "Oh, okay. I'll, get my parents and maybe they can help you." With that, the girl turned and began walking away. As she did, Izuku's eyes continued to take her in. From her broad, powerful shoulders all the way down to her. No. I refuse to go through this again. Refuse. Albion's sudden, desperate cry snapped Izuku out of his trance as he jumped at least a foot into the air. After landing and clutching at his heart, he looked down at the blue gem that had reappeared in his left hand in confusion. Albion, what was that about? Thought Izuku, communicating directly to the dragon merged with his soul. For a moment, Izuku just stood as he listened to the heavy breathing of Albion. What in the world could have caused a dragon like him to panic so much? "Sorry, partner," Albion said eventually. "I just had. Well, what I mean to say is, my last partner had certain tastes that sort of. He wasn't as bad as this other human. But all the same, I just thought, for a moment, that you might have similar tastes is all." And the thought of having to go through all that again caused a bit of a panic attack. Izuku nodded his head in understanding. There had been times when a sudden bang had caused similar fears within him, as they brought back certain memories of the past. Of being on the ground, helpless with a certain ashen blonde standing above him. The feeling of being utterly helpless within that old playground. The feeling of being a Deku. "I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do?" thought Izuku sympathetically. No, I'm fine," was the reply from the ancient dragon, his breathing now fully under control. "Been through enough group therapy to last me a lifetime and beyond." Izuku nodded as he looked up. The pretty girl was gone, but he could now hear footsteps approaching. Taking a deep breath, Izuku straightened himself as he mentally prepared himself to meet his sensei. He could do this. He knew he could. Even if there was a pretty girl in the room, he could manage a conversation. A few minutes later proved Izuku wrong. Standing before him were 3 people, the pretty girl and her parents. And it was clear that the girl got her looks from her mother. The woman's hair was the same color of orange, except she kept hers loose and flowing all the way down to her shoulders. What's more was that she was dressed in a black, skin-tight bodysuit that showed off her curves. Then there was the father, his sensei, who was a tall, bald man with a black beard that was pointed in the front and on both sides. He stood there in a sleeveless gi, arms crossed. As he looked down at the boy, he could probably crush into powder, using only his thumb. So, do you wish to train here at this dojo? Did your parents send you here to toughen you up or something? Izuku flinched at the man's tone and words. His voice was deep by nature, while the tone told Izuku that he had little interest in him. And going by what he had just said, caused Izuku to wonder just how many kids had entered through those doors for that exact reason. With his body shaking slightly, Izuku managed to look that man in the eyes. "And no, sir. I wanted this," the young man managed to say with a minimal amount of stuttering. Before Izuku could avert his gaze, he saw the man's eyebrow rise slightly. He also noted that the woman's eyes seemed to sparkle a bit with excitement. Then, when the man spoke again, his tone was a tad warmer, friendlier. "I see," said Mr. Kendo, a slight smile almost visible on his face. "Well then, tell me what you hope to accomplish by training here." Izuku took a deep breath before looking back at the man, his eyes shining with all the will and determination the boy had in his body. As he did this, the man standing before the young Midoriya couldn't help but smile a bit. "I want to become a hero, more than anything else in the world," he said almost instantly. However, that rush quickly died as he lowered his head slightly. I know I'm probably not much to look at right now. That I'm weak, worthless even. But I want to change that. I promise I'll work hard and—" Izuku stopped as the man placed a meaty hand on his shoulder, nearly knocking him down. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the pretty girl frowning, while her mother's look became concerned. "Young man, if you did come here by your own choice, then you are most certainly not weak. Nor are you worthless," said Mr. Kendo in a firm tone, the type that stated that this was final. As he lifted his hand off Izuku, whose heart seemed ready to burst. A part of him wanted to clutch at it while tears poured from his eyes. Yet the man's gaze commanded Izuku to remain focused on him. "Now, before I can even consider taking you in as a student, I would like to know how such thoughts came to be. Is it because your quirk is extremely weak, or are you quirkless?" A lump formed in Izuku's throat as he thought about his past. Thought about that day in the playground when he had tried to protect a fellow kid from being bullied by Kaken. About how he had gotten the nickname Deku. He thought back to the laughter that always followed whenever he told others about his dream. Then he looked up at the man standing before him, took a deep breath, and began to tell him what he could. Naturally, he told him the same thing he had told his parents about divine dividing, and he gave a less than detailed account of what life had been like for him, never giving out names or going too deep into detail. But despite that, Izuku had a feeling that the man was filling in the blanks all on his own. Perhaps, given the question he had asked, he had dealt with plenty of people who had been in the same position as Izuku. Maybe even some that had been worse off. When Midoriya finished, the man was silent for several seconds as he stood there nodding to himself. "Izuku Midoriya, now I am certain you are the type of person that this dojo welcomes with open arms," said Mr. Kendo as he reached out to pat the green-haired boy on the shoulder, doing his best not to knock him over. "You are the type of person that, no matter how many times you have been knocked down, have gotten back onto your feet. That there is the truest form of strength. And now, you are recognizing your flaws and seeking to improve." Izuku suddenly found a spot on the floor that was very interesting, staring at it as his face flushed with embarrassment. "I guess I should have tried doing this sooner, right?" said Midoriya, more as a statement than a question as he realized his own mistake. Both the man and Albion chuckled at that remark, the dragon's tone echoing in his head so that only he could hear. "Well, given what your dream is, and that you thought that you were quirkless, I'd say not training your body at the very least was foolish," stated Mr. Kendo with a bemused smile. "But at least you recognized that now. And if that determination I saw in your eyes is anything to go by, you will be giving this your all." Izuku's eyes widened slightly at that before another question tickled in the back of his mind. One he had asked before. Given what Mr. Kendo had said prior, asking if he had been quirkless as well as what he had said after, was there a chance? Would he give a different answer? Or would Izuku be denied once more? After taking a breath to steel his nerves, Izuku spoke again, doing his best to look in the eyes of the man before him. Can I ask you something? If I had come here, still quirkless, do you think I could be a hero? Mr. Kendo didn't answer right away. Rather, he paused, stoking his beard while looking like he was collecting his thoughts. Well, I certainly wouldn't discourage you, said Mr. Kendo at last, his words surprising Izuku. I would rather arm you with all the tools you would need so that you could, at the very least, try. If you succeeded, then the taste of victory would wash away the bitterness of defeat you had dealt with for so long. And if you failed, then I believe you could move on from that knowing that you gave it your all. How does that saying go? Better to shoot for the stars and fall in a blaze of glory than to have never tried at all. Yes, I believe that's it. Izuku found it harder to keep his feelings inside now. Tears were stinging around his eyes. It might not have been the words he had wanted his mother to tell him back when he was a kid. It wasn't the words he hoped his hero would tell him if they ever met. Yet after years of people telling him to not even bother, hearing someone say that he'd let him try was powerful in its own right. Thank you, Mr. Kendo, Izuku managed to say, while doing his best not to fall to his knees. So, as Izuku did his best to get himself under control, he entered the dojo to begin his training. Or, rather, to fill out the paperwork needed first. Then the training. Texas Smash, Izuku, dressed in his own white gi, charged at his training partner, Izuku Kendo, ready to try and imitate the fighting style of his hero All Might. With a bored look, Itsuka effortlessly deflected the blow with her wrist before sending a powerful punch right into the green-haired teen's gut. As Izuku felt all the air inside him leave, his orange-haired opponent swiftly knocked him off his feet courtesy of a leg sweep. Since signing up at the Kendo dojo several days ago, finding himself lying in pain on his back was becoming a regular occurrence for the teen. Mrs. Kendo, as it turned out, was in charge of the extra lessons including Parker. And while she was starting Izuku on something simple right now, jumping over uphill railings and then back down, it was still incredibly draining to the teen. As for Mr. Kendo, Izuku had told him that he wanted to learn how to fight like All Might. The instructor hadn't put up any argument, teaching his student the way he wished after their stretches and stances with his daughter being his sparring partner. So far, things weren't going so well. He was doing everything he was told, and Mr. Kendo had told him that his form was correct. So why was it that he was having so much trouble? A hand then appeared in Izuku's field of vision, along with that orange hair that made his face turn a shade of red. Though, thankfully, not as red as it had been on his first day here. That day had been by far one of his worst experiences, as he devolved into an awkward mess just standing before her, not knowing where to look. Izuku had, at first, decided to focus on her face. This proved to be a mistake, as he had become just as flustered as when they had first met, made all the worse as she stood there looking back at him with such a soft and warm expression. As tiny squeaks escaped his mouth, Izuku shifted his eyes downward, hoping that would help. No, it was worse. Because now he could see her neck along with all the exposed flesh right underneath it. Quickly, Izuku realized if he kept staring there, Itsuka might think he was staring at her breasts. So, to avoid being called a pervert, his gaze shifted down again to her stomach, which wasn't any better. Soon enough, he was looking at her legs, which were moving towards him. The next thing he knew, Izuku was looking up at the ceiling in pain until Itsuka's face came into view, ready to help him to his feet. It took a few more times of him getting knocked onto his back before he managed to not feel as awkward looking at her. Though, talking to her and just being too close to her were difficult at times, as his face would turn bright red. As he was now feeling less awkward around her. Groaning, he took the hand and got to his feet. Thanks, Itsuka, he managed to groan, accepting the offered hand and getting to his feet. No problem, as she spoke. Itsuka's voice was bright and chipper. She then smiled, something that contrasted greatly with the look she had just moments ago. Ready to try again? Yeah, began Izuku. Then, as he noticed Itsuka beginning to turn, Midoriya quickly blurted out a question. Something he had been meaning to ask for some time. But, do you have any advice on what I'm doing wrong? I mean, All Might has a fighting style that fits him, interrupted Itsuka, interrupting her training partner. There was no way she could have missed the confused expression on Izuku's face. So when she spoke next, it was done in what he had begun to think of as her big sister voice. The tone she used when she was explaining something, holding up a finger as she did so, all with a helpful smile on her face. Look, All Might's fighting style works well with his body type. Because he's so big and has so much mass, he can put more weight behind his attacks along with his strength. Even the most basic punch can be made several dozen times more effective because of that. He's also fast enough so that his opponents don't have time to deflect or dodge an attack. And his strength, well, you know how insane it is. Izuku let out a hum as he brought a hand to his chin, muttering to himself as a finger tapped against the side of his face. So, if I want to fight more like All Might, I need to get bigger, gain more muscle mass, get faster, and become stronger. Maybe I could start. Izuku, can I ask you a question? Interrupted Itsuka again. When Midoriya turned to look at her, he was surprised to see that her smile was gone. Now, she looked worried. Do you really hate yourself that much? What? Izuku shouted, taking a step back as he did so. I'm sorry, it's just, she began before pausing, looking away in a manner that seemed to show that she was having a hard time putting her thoughts into words. After a moment, it looked like she decided to just go for it. Listening to all of that makes it sound like you want to completely change who you are instead of trying something else. Izuku didn't know what to say to that at first. To be honest, he had never really thought about it. Sure, he idolized All Might, but who didn't? He was the greatest hero of all time. Who wouldn't want to be just like him? Especially when you were everything the man wasn't. Then, when he spoke, he lowered his head slightly to avoid looking at Itsuka. For the longest time, nobody believed in me, he began, lowering his head slightly so as to avoid looking directly at Itsuka. Not my mom, the kids I used to play with. Even my best friend didn't think much of me. That's why he gave me the nickname Deku. Because it fit me so well. Because I was useless. But that never stopped me from wanting to be more like All Might. To be the type of hero who could just reassure everyone around him with a smile. To let everyone know that things would be alright because I was there. So I want to be just like him. But if you do that, then it won't be your smile that reassures everyone. It'll still be All Might's, said Itsuka, her words causing Izuku's head to shoot up. Now he could see that she had never taken her eyes off of him, an odd smile on her face that he couldn't place. Izuku, if what you want is for people to see your smile and feel reassured, then you have to become your own hero. Don't limit yourself to thinking that there's only one way to do things. Because, if you do, you'll end up missing so much potential. My daughter is correct, came the voice of their instructor. Turning his Izuku saw that Mr. Kendo had risen from where he had been sitting as he watched their bouts. Now he had a very serious look on his face. Midoriya, if you truly wish to become a hero, then you must first overcome this handicap, yourself. Your own self-doubts and your views on All Might. Those do you a great disservice. They chain you, binding you to the ground so that you can never soar through the air on your own wings. I know you can be so much more if you just give yourself a chance. Izuku swallowed hard, while grabbing a shaking arm. A part of him felt confused in so many ways. His mind was buzzing. He heard what they were saying, but, how do I do that? He asked. How do you change the very idea of the pinnacle of what it means to be a hero? How do you change that image you have in your head, guarding it with everything you have? You can figure it out yourself, Mr. Kendo said simply, surprising Izuku. Do you know why? Because you, like everyone else, were born with the same thing that All Might and other great people have had. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a brain. No matter how the world sees them, you have everything that every pro hero had when they started out. With those same tools, you too can become great as long as you have the will. How much you're willing to hone them, how much you are willing to learn. All that is up to you. So figure out what works for Izuku Midoriya, while carrying on with the spirit of All Might. And once you do, I'll help you down that path you have chosen. For a long time, Izuku just stood there as he processed what he was being told. To be honest, he had never looked at heroes that way before. He had always seen them as these amazing people like Kaken, born with the strength, courage, and drive to do whatever they wanted. But now that he thought about it, both he and Kaken had started off exactly the same. What was different, what separated him from people like Kaken and All Might, was that they got quirks. They learned how to fight with what they had been given. The same went for other heroes like Kamui Woods, Rukyu, Endeavor, and so many others. But what would work best for him? What could he use? Izuku then blinked, realizing what they were saying about his idolization of All Might. That in wanting to be so much like his hero, he hadn't considered other options. Hadn't done the same level of research that he had used to bring him here to this dojo. After all, he had all the tools he needed. He had eyes to see so many different styles, and a body to train in them. The mind to figure out if their strengths fit him, and that their flaws didn't hinder him. He just needed to figure it out on his own. I believe you are beginning to understand, Albion commented in his head. Izuku nodded before looking over at his instructor. Can you show me some other fighting styles? He asked. The man grinned before nodding. Time passed within the Kendo dojo, with Izuku making up for all the lost time he had spent wishing he had a quirk and hoping that things would just work out. To say that Mr. Kendo was a wellspring of information regarding martial arts would have been an understatement. The man lived up to his reputation and had a level of passion for the art of combat in the same vein as Izuku himself when it came to heroes. Mr. Kendo seemed to know just about every martial art form in existence, both those still used today as well as those that hadn't really been practiced since the pyramids had been built. The man even had notebooks on some of the unique fighting styles of some of the major pro heroes, detailing their strengths and weaknesses. Not just notes, but also drawings of the stances for those heroes' finishing or signature moves. The biggest difference between their notebooks was that Mr. Kendo's writing was like a work of art compared to Izuku's hastily written notes. That passion, as Izuku quickly learned, turned out to be a double-edged sword. During Izuku's time training at the dojo, he witnessed a significant number of new students who were brought there, some seeming to be dragged by their parents. Often, those kids looked on fearfully of everything around them, as if they were unsure if this was the place for them. That, or they held expressions that said they would rather be anywhere but here. As for the parents, well, they were going on and on about how they wanted Mr. Kendo to toughen them up, or to just get them away from their computer games before they even made it to the back room. Those students never lasted long, doing everything in their power to get out. There were a few students, however, that stayed on longer as they became interested. Though half of those teens left as they grew annoyed at the advice Mr. Kendo gave when he suggested other forms of martial arts that they might be more interested in. An issue that Izuku no longer had. One by one, the father and daughter duo showed Izuku every martial art they knew and let him get a feel of each. The green-haired teen learned about the basics of Kenpo and karate, while also experiencing being thrown with a judo technique. He experienced the rhythm of capoeira before moving on to kung fu, followed by things like gunhead martial arts. In the end, Izuku discovered that the kicks he learned in Muay Thai and Taekwondo felt more natural to him. He could more easily flow into the stances of these moves and use them more effectively than what he had been trying prior. What's more, they just felt right. More so than any of the other times he tried to emulate All Might smashes. The more he learned about these styles, the more he practiced with them, the more influenced he became to make something that was his own. To use what he was learning as the foundation of his own style. But that was not the only thing that he was picking up on. Mr. Kendo and Itsuka were teaching him how to read his opponent. What a shift in their stance meant, how to tell what direction the attack was coming from, and so forth. This was something Izuku was able to pick up on fairly easily thanks to all the time he spent watching various heroes, learning to spot when they would be using their signature moves and other aspects of their quirks. Now those skills had been taken up from 10 to 20. While this was going on, his training with Mrs. Kendo was slowly producing impressive results. Bit by bit, she moved him up in his Parker routine, pushing him further and further. She showed the green-haired teen, along with the rest of the class, how to jump from one corner wall to the next in order to scale it, and how to use the same trick when descending. He learned how to shift his momentum around when he fell from a high area, going into a roll so that he would sustain fewer injuries. He began to leap from building to building, and, in time, went from a scrawny kid who could barely run 5 minutes before feeling like he was about to die to a well-toned, well-muscled athlete who stayed with the class, even when everyone else dropped out. As for school, things had certainly changed since the day Izuku awakened Divine Dividing. The story of how Midoriya, of all people, had managed to overpower Bakugo and knock him into the desks had passed around the school so many times that it might as well have become a local legend. What's more, many of his classmates began to take notice of Izuku's ever-improving build. It was during gym class, where they were playing a game of basketball with shirts versus skins, Izuku being skins, that all his hard work with the kendos had been put on display for everyone to see, to which many of his classmates complimented him. He even noticed that some of the girls, the same ones who had snickered at him and left him to the mercy of Bakugo prior, were now blushing at him. Meanwhile, with Bakugo, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the team became more and more irritated. Whenever even the slightest bit of praise was given to Izuku in his presence, the explosive blonde would shoot death glares at the one who spoke before turning his anger on the holder of the Divine Dividing. As soon as Izuku began to perform better in P or show a marked improvement in his grades, Bakugo's fist would soon slam into a desk or locker, while letting out a shout of rage. As for Midoriya's quirk, Izuku repeated the same story he was telling everyone in order to avoid confusion. Nearly all of his classmates, when they heard this, just nodded while looking thoughtful and saying that it made sense to them. Bakugo, on the other then. "You have to be kidding me," he screamed when he had heard the reason, veins appearing on his neck as he did so. That damned nerd knew about his quirk this entire time. That Deku. He was mocking me, looking down on me. Eventually, it reached the point where Bakugo blew up his own deck in a fit of rage before letting out a savage scream that promised bloody murder while eyeing his former childhood friend. It probably would have escalated further into a full-blown fight had not their homeroom teacher, as well as several others who heard the noise, rushed in at that moment. Needless to say, the teen was punished, but only with a stern warning from the principal, as he did not wish to ruin the future of such a promising student over one incident of misconduct. However, it was quickly made clear that, should anything like this happen again, the school would have to take more drastic actions. This was only enough to keep Bakugo somewhat at bay, gripping his pencils so tightly that he had to buy them in large packs daily or clawing at his new desk in order to keep himself from doing anything explosive in class. But in those times outside of the class, Katsuki Bakugo would vent by putting the green-haired teen down with his words. "It doesn't matter what shitty quirk you now have," Bakugo had said while practically being dragged away by his closest friends. "You'll never be able to reach my level, no matter how hard you try. And you'll still never get into US, so quit looking down on me." And so, eventually, the day of the entrance exam loomed ever so close on the horizon. Begin. As soon as the signal was given by Mr. Kendo, both Izuku and Itsuka, both of whom were in their fighting stances, closed the distance between each other within the dojo. Sweat rolled down their faces from the several prolonged matches the pair had gone through already, caressing the slight bruises they both carried as they did. But despite this, both teens just grinned in anticipation as their last bout of the night began. Izuku, having analyzed her fighting style for some time now, knew that she was more than likely going to start off with a powerful right hook aimed for his chest before going in with a flurry of punches. And, after staring into her eyes, knew that this time would be no different. Rather than blocking it, Izuku leaned back to allow the first blow to sail over him, while at the same time kicking upwards. As he expected, Itsuka moved back to avoid the blow, which nearly grazed her chin. However, Izuku wasn't done, landing on the ground with his hands, hitting the mat first. He used the rebound in order to launch himself forward with his leg, extended ready to connect with the orange-haired girl's gut. Unfortunately for Izuku, Itsuka saw this coming, and was able to move back just in time to avoid an attack that would have knocked the air right out of her. Once Izuku realized that his attack wouldn't connect, he managed to spin his body around rapidly before landing on his feet. But he didn't come to a complete stop, still using the momentum he had generated to move into a spin kick while moving forward. Itsuka blocked the attack with her arms, grunting from the impact yet smiling all the same. This, after months of hard work, was the final evolution of all of Izuku's training, the shooting dragon style. This style, named in honor of Albion, used the extensive leg work and training he had gained in Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Parkour, and various other martial arts he had learned and brought together with the help of Mr. Kendo, in order to deliver powerful kicks on his own, as well as using his surrounding in various ways. As for his hands and arms, for right now they were going to be used to block or deflect enemy attacks when he couldn't dodge, though he hoped that, when he would be able to practice more with divine dividing, he would also include using his dividing ability when blocking. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was something Izuku was taking pride in. For the next several minutes, the match continued as Itsuka sent punch after punch toward her forest-haired training partner, while Izuku did his best to dodge them and counter with his own kicks. Sweat continued to roll down their bodies, sprinkling onto the mat, yet neither teen paid it any mind as they pushed their bodies further. In the end, it was thanks to the years of experience she had over Izuku that Itsuka managed to deliver a blow powerful enough to knock him down. "That's match. Good job, both of you," declared Mr. Kendo with a hearty laugh filled with pride in his two students. As he did, Atsuko walked over to Izuku and extended her hand to him as she panted heavily with a big grin on her face. For a moment, Izuku just looked at the friendly gesture. When he had first started taking these lessons, the gesture was practically foreign, causing him to flinch. But now, after 10 months, such gestures were common as Izuku finally had a friend after so many years. Itsuka was pretty easygoing, willing to talk to Izuku on just about anything when they were having their breaks or when they happened to meet up in public. She was just herself, and Izuku felt like he could just let down his guard whenever she was around. The two had even started hanging out on days when they weren't training to just have some fun together. How that happened, Izuku hadn't the foggiest. One moment they were talking over the phone, and the next moment he was in Itsuka's room, which surprisingly had a bit of a motorcycle theme to it, where the girl posed to help Izuku practice his drawing of her for when he included the young Kendo into his hero notebooks. He was honestly surprised he hadn't passed out in shock as he sat there, sitting on a girl's bed. After that, it just became a regular thing for them to simply hang out. Soon enough, Izuku took the offered hand, though he did blush as he was helped to his feet, noticing that Itsuka's gi had opened slightly to show off a bit more of her skin. Nothing too perverted, but coming a little close. So the teen did the only thing he could think of and averted his eyes. "Good job, Midoriya," said Itsuka, slightly panting as she spoke. "I can't believe you're the same scrawny kid that came here almost a year ago. Are you sure your quirk isn't some super specific learning quirk? Like you can learn and master martial arts faster?" "Thanks, but I don't think so," equally panting Izuku, feeling the sweat rolling down his face and back as he spoke. Still, he managed to let out a laugh, feeling a little bit embarrassed as he kept his gaze slightly downward. "Besides, even if I did, it would be no match for all the hard work you've put into your training." Izuku managed to look his sparring partner in the eye to see her beaming at him with pride, her smile nearly blinding him, just in time as Mr. Kendo approached the pair to further congratulate the pair. That, as well as instructing them to rest their bodies for the next couple of days, so they would be in tip-top shape for the U.A. entrance exam. After all, it was only a few days away. On the day of the entrance exam, Izuku was making his way toward the entrance of the famous hero school. The teen's body trembled with each step he took as his nervousness began to get the better of him. "Oh man, did I study enough for the written exam?" thought Izuku, knowingly muttering to himself as panic set in. "Did I study the right things? I know I did really well in the mock exams, but is that enough to pass? What about the practical exam? I know I'm just going to mess everything up." "Relax, partner," rumbled Albion's voice in Izuku's head. "Easy for you to say," thought Izuku. "You're not the one taking the exam. If I fail, then all of my hard work will have been for nothing. I'll let Mr. Kendo down. I'll let Itsuka down. They'll think that everything they've helped me with has been a waste of time." "Do you really believe that?" asked Albion in a serious tone. Izuku's thoughts trailed off as he stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, looking down at the ground as people began to pass him by. He tried to imagine their faces, looking down upon him with the same level of disgust and anger that Bakugo would shoot at him. Only, it looked so alien to him, so unnatural. "I understand what you are going through," spoke the great white dragon within him after a moment or two of silence. "You are not the first human I have been sealed within to let your fears and nerves get to you. Now, take a breath and relax." At first, Izuku wanted to argue with Albion, but decided to trust him on this. After all, the ancient dragon hadn't led him astray yet. Slowly, Izuku took a breath before exhaling with equal slowness. As he did so, he could feel the trembling lessen as Albion continued to speak. Good. Now that you are relaxed, then perhaps you will listen to reason. Failure is not even a possibility. Not when you have the power of the divine dividing within you. Whatever challenges these fools place in front of you, they shall be overcome by using their own power against them. And what is it your teacher taught you? You have everything you need to succeed. You just need to figure it out. Slowly, Izuku smiled as he remembered the words that Mr. Kendo had told him. Albion was right. He had all the tools he needed. All that was left was to see the problem before him and figure it out. Except, okay, that'll help me with the practical, thought Izuku. But what about the written portion? I'm still a little nervous about that. Albion snorted. You have studied for this exam more than most of my previous partners have studied in their entire lives. Albion replied with a snort. I highly doubt that there will be anything on it that you wouldn't know. And, should that happen, you need only ask me for assistance. Izuku jumped at that, scaring the people around him with the sudden act. Unable to help himself, the green-haired teen began looking around as if fearful that someone heard that. Wouldn't that be cheating? Asked Izuku in a timid tone. Ha! I am a part of you, roared the dragon in amusement. Our very souls are connected. It would be more akin to say you were conversing with yourself. Besides, how would they know? That, might be true, admitted Izuku. But it still feels wrong somehow. Now he could practically feel Albion rolling his eyes as he spoke next. Bah, fine, have it your way. Lightly chuckling at Albion's antics, Izuku decided that he had wasted enough time just standing around and continued along his way. Yet, he did not get far as he heard a girl's voice speaking in broken Japanese, sometimes slipping English words into her sentences. Curious, Izuku began to scan the crowd before noticing a girl with large horns sticking out of her long, blonde hair. Her blue eyes glistened, her voice in a panic as she moved from person to person and shoved a piece of paper in front of them to which she then pointed to something on it. Most of the people there, all of whom looked like students from various schools, either ignored her completely or just laughed as they kept on walking. He then watched as she approached another student, a tall boy with dark blue hair and glasses, who seemed to just glare at her with annoyance. She once again spoke, but as soon as she held up the paper, the blue-haired teen cut in. "Unacceptable," bellowed the bespectacled teen loudly, catching the attention of everyone in the area while making a chopping motion with one arm. "If you cannot take this seriously, then I suggest you just go home." With that, the boy stiffly turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving the girl to tremble in a way similar to how Izuku had been not too long ago. Just standing there, trembling as she clenched the paper in her hands, while looking like she would burst into tears at any moment. Seeing someone in distress, Izuku did the only thing he could think of. He reached out to her. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Izuku's words, spoken in slightly strained English, caused the girl's ears to perk as she turned her attention onto the divine divider. He could see hope in her eyes as she quickly approached him. As she did, Izuku heard the clip-clop sounds of hooves. Very quickly he noticed that the sound was coming from this girl who, indeed, had hooves. "Why you speak English?" asked the girl in a shaky voice. "Enough to hold a decent conversation," explained Izuku with a nod. "My dad works in the States, so I thought it would be a good idea to learn it as a second language in middle school." "Oh, thank God." As the girl said this, she jumped into the air happily before showing Izuku the paper in her hand. Looking down, the first thing that caught Izuku's attention was the UA logo in bright blue at the top. As he began to skim the document, quickly translating as much of the English into Japanese as he could, it dawned on him that he had received this exact same letter. The letter informing him about when and where the entrance exam was going to be. "I'm really sorry," said the blonde-horned girl. "I was a little nervous this morning about taking the exam, so I decided to stop at one of your manga cafes. I always wanted to visit one, and I thought it would be a good way to calm my nerves. You know, relaxing with a good manga to take my mind off things. Then I guess I, sort of lost track of time." As she said that last part, the blonde looked away guiltily, making Izuku wonder just how long she stayed there. "Anyways, I trying to find this school," she continued after a moment. "But my Japanese isn't that good yet, and no one seems to be very helpful. Guess they all must be busy too. I would have used my phone to get directions, but I left it at my hotel. The last thing I wanted was it going off in the middle of the exam or getting damaged during the practical." Izuku bit his lower lip before glancing around, again noticing the students wearing uniforms from various schools. He had a feeling he knew where they were all heading, to the UA entrance exam. For a moment, the teen wondered why no one was willing to help. After all, they were all trying to become heroes, so why not do something heroic? Even if it was nothing more than a small act of kindness and help her. The answer he got, however, made him sick to his stomach. They're not helping her because they don't want her to show up, Izuku realized with a hint of anger. There are only 36 spots available for the first-year hero course, and everyone is fighting for them. If she doesn't show, then that will be one less person they have to compete against. And if she's late, the result will be the same, since the school will turn her away if she's even a second late. But this isn't right. This isn't how heroes are supposed to act. As a righteous fury began to bubble within Izuku's body, Albion spoke up. "This is nothing new. Humans will, naturally, often prioritize their own desires and happiness over that of others. It is understandable. That doesn't make what they are doing right or heroic," snapped Izuku. "I never said it was either of those. Just that it was understandable," was Albion's reply. Sighing, Izuku looked back at the girl who stood there looking at him with those big, blue eyes of hers. As he looked at her, Izuku's thoughts became more focused. He knew he couldn't control what others thought or did, but he had full control over his own actions. And he was going to do what a hero should always strive to do: help someone else, even at the cost of oneself. Even if helping her meant that there would be more competition for him later. Something that might even end up costing him entrance into the school of his dreams. It would be worth the risk just to help her. "Well, I can show you the way if you want," he said, smiling warmly. "Really? You don't mind?" asked the girl, her blue eyes brightening considerably while her smile grew. "I'm not going to make you late for anything, am I?" Izuku just shook his head. "To be honest, I'm actually heading there myself, so it's no problem." "Oh, right. I have introduced myself. My name is Izuku Midoriya. And I'm Pony Tsunatori," said the American girl with a bit of a peppy jump. "And thank you so much. I really hope we both get in." It would be great to have a classmate that can speak English and is nice. Izuku grinned, voicing his agreement as the two headed off toward the famous school. What neither of them knew was that the whole thing had been caught on a hidden camera. One of the hundreds placed around the area surrounding the UA. It would also come as no surprise that they also didn't know a certain principal had watched and listened to the entire exchange, smiling into his teacup as he wrote down a series notes. Eventually, Izuku and Pony made it onto the ground of UA, where Itsuka was waiting for them. When Izuku first spotted his orange-haired friend, she was leaning against the gate as she looked down at her watch. It was hard to miss her worried expression, biting her lower lip the entire time. No doubt she spotted him out of the corner of her eye as, when they began approaching the big fist girl, Itsuka looked up in both relief and annoyance. Then her face morphed into confusion when she noticed Pony standing next to Izuku instead of moving with the rest of the crowd. After a brief explanation of why he had been a little late in introducing Pony, the three went into the building to take the written portion of the test. Needless to say, the written exam's difficulty lived up to the school's reputation. It seemed like none of the questions were straightforward, as nearly every single one of them was written in a way that was meant to trip or misdirect the students into answering it incorrectly. Even Albion, who looked down at the test through Izuku's eyes, found himself struggling to answer the questions. Thankfully, Izuku did not rush himself, reading and then rereading the questions as many times as he felt necessary before fully understanding what they were asking, and then writing in his answer. As he worked, his attention was drawn away from his paper several times, thanks to a few people who were overconfident in their cunning, as they believed that they were smart enough to cheat and get away with it. Such thoughts were swiftly proven false, as the teachers who patrolled the auditorium would silently rush over to these less than honorable students to catch them in the act and instantly remove them from the premises. A more disheartening sight were those who sat there, looking down at their test papers in abject horror before just getting up on their own and leaving. When the exam was over, Izuku spotted Itsuka, who gave him a grin along with a big thumbs up, which he returned. He then looked around to see that Pony also seemed to be in high spirits. After a little bit of a wait, Present Mike entered the scene to explain to them the practical portion of the exam. According to the DJ hero, they would be fighting a large number of robotic villains within mock cities. There were 3 different types of villains, each one with a numerical value based on their level of difficulty, with 1 being the weakest while 3 being the strongest. Basically, you got points equal to the villains you defeated. It seemed simple enough, but Izuku did have a nagging feeling in the back of his head that they weren't telling them everything. Then, as that blue-haired student began asking about the 4th robot on the sheet that they were all given, Izuku decided to get Albion's opinion while doing his best to pay attention to what was being said in the real world. "What do you think, Albion?" asked Izuku after conveying his opinion on the matter. "I believe that your suspicions have merit," agreed Albion, Izuku imagining the great dragon nodding as he spoke. Given how the written test was presented, it would be foolish not to expect some sort of surprise. For example, if there was a way to gain points, then perhaps there is also a method by which points are lost. Izuku nodded, barely even noticing that the blue-haired teen had chastised him in front of everyone, as it looked to all the world that he was lost in his own little world, while mumbling to himself. "Sorry, just thinking," said Izuku quickly. That seemed to barely pacify the other teen, whose attention returned to Present Mike as soon as he began to talk once more. And as he did, Izuku went back to his conversation with Albion. "Right," thought Izuku as he did his best to keep his muttering low. "We should keep our eyes open. However, I am a little worried that we're facing robots. I've never taken the energy from something that wasn't alive before. Is it possible for divine dividing to work on a robot?" Replied Albion, the ancient dragon pondering the question for several long moments. In the past, divine dividing has been able to absorb the energy from angels, devils, fallen angels, dragons, magical attacks, and so forth. I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to do the same thing with robots. However, Albion's words trailed off as the students around them began to rise from their seats, heading toward their assigned battle zones. Patiently, the dragon waited, hoping that Izuku could figure out what he was about to say. Thankfully, he didn't need to wait long. The drain might not affect them the same way Izuku realized, his worry quickly returning. Can a machine's strength be cut in half? Its speed. I've seen machines slow down when their power is really, really low. But this? I might need to use divide a couple of times to get them to that point. See, can my body handle it? Oh no. I knew I should have tested divine dividing more. Izuku was now moving towards the locker rooms, a hand on his chin as he continued to be deep in thought. "Okay, Izuku. Panicking like this won't get you anywhere, the teen thought. Just need to focus. I'm a lot stronger than I was back when I first used Divine Dividing, so I should be able to handle the transfer better. If I continue to use that energy to its max potential, then maybe I can burn through it quick enough to use the divide on the same robot a couple of times. Maybe 3. That will be 30 seconds, so I should be able to dodge their attacks. Perhaps I could try looking for any structural weak points while I'm dodging. And so, Izuku's mind continued to try and work out the problem as he headed towards the test that would determine his fate. Izuku Midoriya had hoped that there would be at least one familiar face within the group heading to his testing site. Someone like Itsuka, so that they could stretch together, or Tsunotori, so that they could have a chat. Stuff that might help ease his nerves. But, alas, the universe was not too kind to the boy, as the only familiar face he saw was the blue-haired teen that had scolded Tsunotori. As Izuku began to stretch his legs, he momentarily considered approaching the taller teen to simply explain what had happened this morning, and perhaps then he could help arrange a proper apology from him. However, upon looking at the stony and harsh expression the boy was giving off, the teen decided against it. This teen had already shown that he was easily triggered into thinking the worst about others around him. Odds were that if Izuku did walk up to him, the other teen would loudly chastise him. Maybe after the exams, when everyone wasn't as stressed, he'd wait a moment. The bespectacled teen's legs had exhaust vents in them. Seeing them brought Izuku's mind to the Ida family and the turbo hero, Ingenium. Was this guy related to them or something? As the young Midoriya's mind began to spiral into his analysis mode on the possible Ida boy's quirk, the door to the testing area opened. For a moment, no one made a move as they all just stared at the empty city within. Come on, come on. What are you all standing around for? Yelled Present Mike from up above. Almost as one, the students turned their attention upwards to find the man looking down at them, just to the side of the gate with a manic smile on his face. There are no countdowns in real life. The test's already begun. With that, everyone began to run right into the city at top speed. Some, like the maybe Ida boy, shot past the rest with amazing speed, leaving the rest of the group far behind. Then there were people like Izuku who, thanks to his intense workout regimen, managed to stay in front of the pack without feeling winded. It didn't take long before the first robotic villain was spotted. A one-pointer robot came out of a nearby alley up ahead, looking like it was ready to take down all the students by itself. Upon seeing it, there was a moment when Izuku felt fear touch his heart. After all, this was a machine built to test them, to fight them. But the holder of the Divine Dividing pushed down that fear the same way he did when he was jumping from rooftop to rooftop with Mrs. Kendo. As the teens behind him began screaming dibs on the metal foe, Izuku sped up to his max running speed. Though he did not immediately activate Divine Dividing, Midoriya's eyes began to scan his target to find its weakness. While fighting a robot without one's quirk might be considered very foolish, the green-haired teen knew he needed to do this. Needed to confirm that, in case Divine Dividing didn't work on machines, he still stood a chance in this exam. That, as well as something a bit more personal, a part of him needed to know that if he had entered into this exam without any real power, be it a quirk or a sacred gear, that he still stood a chance at being a hero. By the time Izuku was right in front of his foe, the green-haired teen had settled on his target. With all his honed reflexes, the teen bent his knees before leaping up into the air and curled himself into a ball as he began to spin around. Quickly, gravity called him back to earth, the teen sticking out a leg as fell and slammed it right into the neck of the machine. Upon contact, a cracking noise filled the air before the robot hit the ground with its lights dimming into nothingness. It was down. Izuku Midoriya had received his first point. However, there was no time to celebrate his victory. He had won nothing more than a single battle, while the war raged all around him. The other students knew that as they were already moving deeper into the city, as they looked for more robots to fight. So Izuku wasted no more time as he began to look for another robot to defeat. He didn't have to search for very long as the tank-like three-pointer robot came crashing through a wall right in front of Izuku. Acting on instinct, the green-haired youth leaped back just as the machine turned to face him, while firing several rubber bullets from its back. While Midoriya managed to avoid the majority of the attack, one of the projectiles grazed his leg with enough force that it ripped right through his pant leg, while leaving a deep red mark across his skin. Letting out a hiss of pain, Izuku lunged over to the side to avoid getting hit again as his eyes scanned the machine. Sad thing was that this one didn't have such an obvious weakness as the first, and its body looked like it was made of much thicker metal. Perhaps with time, he could uncover the hidden weak spot. But time was the one thing he did not have in abundance at the moment. Guess now is as good a time as any to see if this works. With that thought, Izuku activated Divine Dividing. Instantly, he felt the power in his left hand begin to pool, the blue gem forming for all the world to see. But then it vanished. No, wait, it moved. That power shot through his arm, into his shoulder, and then settled into his back. For a moment, Izuku was confused as to what was happening to him. Then from his back sprouted 2 white wings, each one holding 4 feathers made of bluish energy for a grand total of 8. Unable to help himself, Izuku stood there as he marveled at the change. What is this?" asked a bewildered Izuku. The 3-pointer responded by firing at its target once more. Again, Izuku leaped to the side only to see that both his speed and leap had increased. Almost like he was flying. Well, he did have wings now. "Congratulations, partner," came Albion's voice within Izuku's head. "It seems like all your training has paid off. Your body is now capable of handling the first stage of Divine Dividing. Now you can make full use of your new abilities." "New abilities?" asked Izuku internally, shooting forward towards the 3-pointer to quickly make contact with it. "Divide?" cried the green-haired boy aloud. Midoriya once more felt a surge similar to when he used Divine Dividing on Bakugo nearly a year ago. He could feel the power coursing through his being, the machine's strength and speed being added to his own. Only this time it didn't feel as fleeting as that first time. With wide eyes and a rush moving through his systems, Izuku jumped onto the machine's back, where he then sent a downward kick right into the back of the 3-pointer's head, as Midoriya had expected. This one was a bit tougher, as it needed a second kick before the head would break off from the rest of the body. And while this was going on, Albion spoke. "Yes," was Albion's reply, with Izuku somehow getting the sense that the dragon was nodding. "Since you are a little preoccupied, I'll keep this simple. The wings on your back aren't just for show. Nay. The energy that you have stolen from your foes shall be spread throughout the feathers, and any excess energy will be released from the tips. Just think of it as storage that you can use to keep yourself stronger longer with a built-in runoff system. But be warned, if you drain too much energy with no way to release it, then you shall have to endure the strain that comes with it. These wings will also grant you flight." "Gee, good to know," thought Izuku. Glancing around, Izuku found that he was alone. The streets seemed utterly devoid of any of the foe villains. However, he could hear the sounds of crashes and explosions off in the distance. No doubt the others were racking up a good deal of points. If Izuku wanted to pass this exam, then he would need to hurry up. Bending his knees, the teen prepared to take off into the sky at full speed without really thinking about it. This, sadly, proved to be a mistake, as Midoriya became nothing more than a green and blue blur rocketing through the air, while screaming like a madman. His hands thrashed in front of him, while the world rushed past him, the buildings he passed blending together. He felt himself going up, down, twirling in the air so fast that he could vomit at any moment, and so much more. New fear swiftly came to life, knowing that if he didn't get control of this soon, then he might meet his end by crashing into the street, or into one of the mock buildings. Finally, with a Herculean effort, Izuku put all his focus into stopping. And it worked. The teen stopped instantly with no whiplash. He hovered in the sky, panting while doing his best not to look down. That was a stupid idea. As Izuku panted each and every word, he realized that before he could do anything else, he would need to get the hang of flying. Not just so that he could continue the exam, but also so that he would not become a splat upon the ground. Since time was a factor, Midoriya knew he had to make this both quick as well as effective. After taking a breath, the teen leaned to the left to see what would happen. Thankfully, he did move in that direction, so Izuku decided to experiment a bit more as he leaned right, forward, and backward, finding himself moving in that direction. Okay, he could work with this. Now that Izuku had the basics down, the teen began to move downward toward the foe city below. Albeit a bit slower this time, his speed was more akin to a sprint than the super speed he had been going mere minutes ago. Yes, Midoriya knew that he was running out of time. However, he also knew that if he did anything like that again, then all he would accomplish would be wasting more time. Later he would begin to practice more with his wings, learning how to fly and how to fight with them. But for now, he had to focus on the test right in front of him. It didn't take long for Izuku to find more robots. 3 of them. 2 1-pointers and a single 2-pointer. Still in the sky, none of the metallic foes had noticed him. A factor that Izuku would capitalize on. Wasting not a single second, Izuku shot down towards the ground while looking like he was doing a flying kick. One aimed right for the center of the 2-pointer. The blow landed, the machine's parts flying all around before either of the other 2 machines could even turn around. Swiftly, Izuku shot toward one of the 1-pointers to make contact. "Divide," yelled Izuku. A smile appeared on the teen's face as his divine dividing took effect once more, the robot slowly turning to look at him. Or, rather, where he had been, as Izuku was already above the two machines. An axe kick was sent down into the arm of the drained one-pointer robot, severing it completely as the green-haired youth then spun around in the air so that his opposite heel would connect with the robot's neck. Crack went the neck of his robotic enemy, its body slumping to the ground as Izuku managed to just barely grab hold of the severed limb before it hit the ground. The last one-pointer charged forward with its arm pulled back, yet Midoriya was faster. Gripping the metal arm with both hands, he swung it right into the midsection of the foe villain. A loud clang echoed through the air as metal embedded into metal, while sparks began to fly. Not another second was wasted as Izuku kicked the makeshift weapon in deeper, the robot powering down and earning the teen another point. Upon realizing that all of his foes were down for the count, Izuku took off to look for more villains. Then, after a few more minutes, the ground began to shake. What's going on here? That thought echoed through the young Midoriya's mind as he took to the sky, the ground shaking at an alarming rate. Then there were the students whose screams of horror occurred mere moments before the teen spotted them racing through the streets. It looked like they were scrambling to get away from something. Theories of what was going on flowed through Izuku's mind as easily as a river. Was it an earthquake or some other natural disaster? Or was there a gas line underneath the city that ignited after one of the students used their quirks to destroy a robot? Maybe even someone's quirk going out of control. Whatever the case, the airborne teen flew out into the middle of the street and looked at what the others were running from. What he saw caused his eyes to widen, while a feeling of utter insignificance overtook him. It was the zero-pointer. The sight of it boggled the mind, nearly causing Midoriya's mind to crash and reboot. It was larger than life as it peered down at the fleeing students from above the buildings with its giant metal head. Giant metal claws crashed into the buildings around it, breaking them apart with no effort at all as pieces fell to the earth below. How thick did the school have to make its metal frame in order to keep it from falling apart? Instincts told the teen to flee, that he stood no chance against such a foe. The rational part of his mind agreed as it began to lay out a plan. While everyone else was running for their lives, he could take advantage of the situation to find more points. Turning, Izuku was about to do just that had it not been for the sound that his ear barely caught. Turning his head, Izuku saw rubble moving on the street, and was that a person underneath? From where he was, he couldn't properly identify who it was. But he could make out the figure of something that was clearly human. A human life that, if someone didn't do something soon, would be snuffed out by the approaching zero-pointer. Clenching his fists, Izuku's mind began to race faster than ever before in his life. He had to do something. If All Might was here, he could have solved this easily. The mighty symbol of peace would have appeared in front of that person in an instant, throwing off the rubble before punching the giant tin can. But could Izuku do any of that? He could try flying down there and saving whoever it was. But what would happen if he or she was pinned down with something, or if the rubble was too heavy to move? What if that thing began to fire some sort of projectile that knocked him out as well? What if the zero-pointer began to speed up and crush the two of them before making its way to the rest of the students? Could he take the robot on with divine dividing? So far, the other robots hadn't given his sacred gear too much trouble. But something told him that a machine like that would have a lot more power. If he did use divine dividing, and he couldn't handle it, then that would be it. And even if he could, he doubted that he could destroy that thing with a punch like All Might. Even if he punched it over and over again, 1,000,000 times, all he would get would be bloody knuckles and broken hands. So what could he? Just then, the words of Mr. Kendo cut through his panicked thoughts. He remembered how the man had told him about his greatest handicap, himself. For, at that moment, he had allowed his fears to get to him. Had allowed himself to start thinking like the old Izuku Midoriya who wanted to be so very much like All Might. But he wasn't that person anymore. Now, he had his own wings to soar through the air. Literally. He had all the tools he needed to succeed. He just needed to figure it out. So, after taking a breath, Izuku flew through the air, a bit faster than before towards the head of the giant robot. Once he got close enough, the teen spun in the air and sent his heel right into one of the 8 red eyes of the zero-pointer. Upon impact, the lens cracked in a spider web formation. Taking half a second to admire his handiwork, the green-haired teen moved back before beginning to circle around its massive head like an annoying fly. From time to time he would deliver a kick here and there against its metallic shell, knowing it wouldn't damage it. But the point of this wasn't to damage it. The Divine Divider knew he was taking a risk with this plan, hoping that this machine was programmed to attack the nearest student, or the one who proved to be more threatening. But as long as he got it to focus on him, Then the rest of his quickly made plan would, in theory, work. After the third pass around its head, the zero-pointer's arms moved as if to swat the teen. Something that the teen easily dodged, zipping to the side as he saw the metal limb coming a mile away. A second arm tried capturing him within its clutches, only to be met with the same result. Briefly, Izuku wondered if this was what it would be like to fight someone with a gigantification quirk. With the zero-pointer's focus now on him, Izuku got it to turn its back on the helpless victim on the ground, as well as the other students taking the test. Slowly it followed the green-haired teen with the glowing wings who dodged each of its arms with ease until they were far enough away. Then came the more dangerous part of Izuku's plan. After dodging one last swipe, the Divine Divider landed on the attacking arm before looking up at its head, while trying, and failing, to smile smugly. Well, it didn't take long for the shadow of a metallic claw to surround the teen. A moment later, it came crashing down, creating a scrapping noise that could be heard all over the testing area. All in the effort to eliminate the annoying fly. Only its effort was in vain as Izuku easily flew out of the area of impact. But the zero-pointer didn't let up as it slid its clawed hand down the arm toward where Izuku was. The Divine Divided waited till the last moment before flying up and over the mass of metal to see the damage the machine had done to itself. That's when he saw it. While the armor plating on the giant was thick and no doubt strong, the force it had used was enough to dent and break off parts of the shell on its arm. Heart pumping faster, the teen spotted several holes that looked big enough for him to enter. And, much like how a virus enters the human body through a cut, Izuku flew into the inner workings of the zero-pointer. There, he began to break everything he saw with ease, as it seemed like the people who made this never considered the possibility that someone could get inside. Explosions both large and small erupted all around him as the teen made his way deeper inside. It was only when he noticed that everything was powering down that he exited the now still machine. For a moment, he stood there gazing at his work. His accomplishment using his own skills. A laugh escaped his lips as he felt the same pride he had when defeating the one-pointer. A part of him felt like celebrating the fact that he had defeated the foe that so many others had run from. More importantly, he had saved the life of that person. Speaking of which, Izuku turned his head to see that whoever was in that rubble was still there, as there had been no one else around to help. Without really thinking about it, the green-haired teen flew down to where the person lay, finding a pretty girl with short brown hair, whose face broke into a smile the moment she saw him land. But as he began to lift the debris off of her present, Mike announced that the exam was over. A couple of hours later, a cleaned-up Izuku Midoriya was walking away from the school with Itsuka Kendo next to him. As they made their way to the train station, the two talked about how they did in their exams, Itsuka explaining how she grabbed robot after robot with her large hands before either crushing them or simply throwing them at other robots. A smile appeared on Izuku's lips as he listened to her words intently, while his eyes watched as her face lit up with fiery excitement, a passionate flame whose color he believed matched the color of her hair. He was almost ashamed to admit that he hadn't done nearly as well as she had, barely scraping up a dozen or so points before the zero-pointer showed up. Then, "Oh my god, Izuku, you took down that giant?" exclaimed Itsuka, her eyes shining with amazement. "I didn't even think that was possible when I saw it." That caused the young Midoriya to chuckle at that, scratching the back of his head. "To be honest, I don't think I would have been able to do it if it hadn't been for what your father told me back when I started," he admitted. "And I don't think I would have been able to get as far into the exam as I did without the trying the both of you gave me." The boy paused, looking at his orange-haired friend with a slight blush on his face. "Remember what you asked me back when I first started at your family's dojo? About hating myself. I guess I really did back then. I just thought I had to be something completely different to save people and bring smiles to their faces. That how I had nothing to offer. But now, because of you and what happened today, I can say that I don't feel like that anymore. Because I was able to save that girl with my own skills, and I made her smile. All I really needed was the confidence." Itsuka smiled back at Izuku, a slight blush on her face from the praise. "Thanks, but I really didn't do all that much," she said before her face turned more serious and worried. "But, what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to keep trying to become a hero," Izuku said instantly, as he had already thought about this while he had been changing. "UA isn't the only hero school out there, so I'll keep working hard so that I can get into a good one. Then, maybe I'll see if I can transfer so that I can join you at UA." Again, Itsuka smiled at that, while moving a bit closer to the boy who had become a close friend. "Say, we still have some time before our train arrives," she said. "How about we take a moment to celebrate? I saw this little coffee shop near the train station this morning that looked nice. So let's go there and give a toast to a job well done. Smiling, Izuku nodded. A few weeks later, Izuku was in his room, holding an envelope from Yua, no doubt holding his test scores, as well as his rejection letter. A part of him didn't even want to open it, instead wanting to focus on the exams for Shiksu, Ketsubutsu, and Osamu. After all, what was the point of reading something when you already knew what it said? Then again, he was curious to know how he did on the written exam, so maybe it was worth opening. Perhaps he could see where he needed to focus his studies for the other hero schools. Taking a deep breath, Izuku opened the envelope to find not a sheet of paper, but a disc that landed on the ground with a clang. Then, as the teen blinked in surprise, the device lit up and projected the image of All Might himself. "I am here, as a holographic projection," declared the projection. Izuku stumbled back at the declaration of the number 1 hero dressed in a pin-stripped suit. What was going on? Why was All Might doing this? "Now, Izuku Midoriya, I shall be giving you your test results," continued All Might without giving a single answer to the questions going on inside Izuku's head. "For the written portion of the exam, you scored fairly high." Izuku watched as All Might stepped to the side as a screen appeared next to him. On it was a picture of the broccoli-haired teen along with his name. Below that were his scores on the various subjects of the exam. As he looked over them, a smile appeared on his face. All Might was right, he had scored high. Sure, none of them were perfect, but they were close. And at the bottom of the exam, it showed that he had placed 4th in this portion of the exam. "You should be very proud of this young man," spoke All Might again after a moment. "But we both know that it's the practical that you are really interested in. For that, you scored a total of 8 villain points." A soft sigh escaped Midoriya's lips, his shoulders slumping slightly. Only 8 points. That was slightly worse than what he thought he had gotten. Figuring that there was really no point in hearing anything else, the teen got up to turn off the projector only to stop when he heard what the number 1 hero said next. "Frankly, it's not a very impressive score when compared to the other examinees," the tall man said. "But fear not, for there were other factors involved with this exam. Behold as I show you a video." Izuku froze as All Might pulled out a remote from nowhere, the image of his test scores being replaced with something else. It took the teen a moment before he recognized the scene. It was of him and Tsunotori right before the exam, when he had helped the American girl find the way to the school. But what did that have to do with anything? "The truth, young Midoriya, is that the exam started before you even reached the main gates of the school," explained All Might. "Cameras were placed throughout the city, watching to see what our new potential students were like when they thought we weren't watching. What you did for this girl, who was a stranger in our country, showed us just who you really were. A person who is willing to help another, even if it does not benefit you in any meaningful way. Even if it might hurt you in the long run. That is true heroism, and for this small act, you were rewarded 8 rescue points by our principal." The screen then changed again, showing Izuku leading the 0-pointer robot away from the injured girl. "You then stood up to a foe much greater than yourself during the actual exam," explained All Might, his voice brimming with pride as he spoke. "Even though you were low on points, you still chose to help another. This act of self-sacrifice was witnessed by a panel of judges who decided to award you with the maximum of 60 rescue points, thus giving you a grand total of 68 rescue points. That, combined with the 8 villain points, gives you a total score of 76 points for the practical." Tears filled Midoriya's eyes as he fell to his knees, looking up at the scoreboard that now appeared before him. There he was, scoring right below Bakugo. "Welcome, young Midoriya, to your Hero Academia. Are you sure you're all set?" asked Inko, standing behind her son as he prepared for school. The woman's hands were clenched together in worry. "You didn't just back action figures, did you?" Izuku said nothing at first, hiding a small smile as he tied his shoes. Today was the day, his first day at his dream school. Yua now dressed in his gray uniform and red tie. The teen felt almost giddy with excitement just to be wearing it. So much so that there wasn't a trace of nervousness within him. That, or it was pushed to the back of his mind. His mother, on the other hand, well, she seemed to have challenged all the anxiety they both should have been feeling. Ever since last night, she had been fretting over every little thing. Was his uniform ironed properly? Had all the right forms been sent to Yua? Did he have everything he needed? Would the school provide the right lunch? "Yep, I'm all set." There was confidence in the Sacred Gear user's voice as he said this, standing up while slinging his backpack onto his back. For a moment, no one said anything as the teen made his way toward the door. It was only when his hand touched the handle that his mother called out his name. Turning to look at his mother, Izuku saw that the worried look she had was gone. Now, in its place, was a smile as well as some tears. "I just wanted to tell you I'm proud of you," she said, hands pumping upward in an encouraging manner. "You're really cool." At that, Izuku felt his own smile grow as he slowly began to open the door. "Thanks, Mom." "Well, I'd better be off," he said. "There you are," came a familiar girl's voice. "We were waiting for you." "Oh, hi, Mrs. Midoriya." Come on," came a second girl's voice along with the sound of hooves clopping on the ground. "We're going to be super duper late if we don't hurry." In his mind, Izuku heard glass shattering as he looked at the pair waiting for him at his doorway. Dressed in their own UA uniforms were Itsuka Kendo and Pony Tsunotori waiting for him. Two girls were at his door waiting for him to walk to school together, with his mother standing right behind. Slowly, very slowly, Izuku turned his head to look at his mother only to have his fears confirmed. The older Midoriya now had her hands clasped together as if in prayer, while her tear ducts held all the usual signs that they were about to explode. My little Izuku is becoming a man," cried Inko. "He really is becoming cool." Knowing what was to follow, Izuku quickly stepped out of his apartment before quickly closing the door behind him, while pressing his back against it for good measure. The door then bulged slightly as it bent outwards due to a massive stream of tears that nearly knocked all of the teens off their feet. As the girls watched in surprise at what was happening, they could hear the cries of the mother inside the apartment. At least she was crying because she was happy. While the stream of tears never really stopped, Izuku felt some of the pressure leave the door, causing him to move away from it. At the same time, he fished out his phone from his pocket to send a text message to his neighbors, asking them to keep an eye on his mom and keep her hydrated. That, and to apologize for any water damage caused again. As he did so, both girls just stared at the door, as well as tears flowing under the crack. Then, Pony looked at him excitedly as she pumped her fists into the air. "Your mom's quirk is super cool," exclaimed the American girl. "It's like Superman's eye lasers from those old pre-quirk comics. Only with water." "Ah, that's not her quirk," exclaimed Izuku awkwardly. "That's more of a family trait. Her real quirk is levitating small objects." Pony just blinked at that. She then looked at Izuku, followed by the door, and then at Itsuka, who simply nodded to confirm. Yeah, Itsuka had seen the Divine Divider tear up once or twice when he became overly emotional, so she had been there to witness it firsthand. Not as powerful as his mother, though. "Oh, are you sure she doesn't have two quirks?" Pony asked. Shaking his head, Izuku put away his phone as the group began to quickly make their way to the train station. As the three of them leaped down multiple stairs at a time, the teenage boy glanced over at his two new best friends as their hair flowed behind them, and thinking about how the American girl had become a good friend to both of them. Shortly after they had received their acceptance letters, Pony had tracked Izuku down. It had been super easy, barely an inconvenience as she put it, since all she had done was politely ask UF for his phone number. As for why she wanted to talk to him, Tsunotori wanted to thank him once again for helping her find her way to the school. That, and she wanted to spend her time working on her Japanese until school started. While a little embarrassed that she thought so highly of his skills, the forest-haired teen had agreed. Thus, over the course of a couple of months, the pair spent time at the local libraries to help with Pony's language issue, after she had found a place to stay in Japan. Not only that, but Izuku went to a manga cafe for the first time along with both Tsunotori and Itsuka, so that the American girl could practice what she had learned by reading the manga aloud. Naturally, Midoriya also spent a great deal of time continuing to train at the Kendo Dojo. There, he and Itsuka continued to train their bodies, while Pony watched with wide-eyed excitement. And sometimes Mr. Kendo would be in such a good mood that he would allow Pony to train with them for free. Back in the present, the trip to Ua seemed to have occurred in the blink of an eye. One moment they were racing to catch their train, managing to squeeze through the doors right as they were closing, and the next the three of them were making their way through the halls of the illustrious hero school. None of them could hide the excitement they were feeling as they marveled at everything they saw, ready to begin their journey to become the very best heroes they could be. The only thing that they found an issue with came from a classroom. They, along with other students walking down the hall, couldn't help but turn their heads to look at the door marked 1A. This was due to all the noise coming from the room as two people whose voices Izuku recognized. The first, and loudest, came from Bakugo as he yelled his usual threats of violence and murder. The other one belonged to that blue-haired boy from the exams who had called out Izuku for him mumbling as well as chastising Pony. While he was not as loud as Bakugo, the blue-haired teen could be heard trying to reprimand the ashen-haired boy for something. Glad we don't have to deal with that, said Itsuka, shaking her head in embarrassment as she eyed the door one last time. Izuku nodded in agreement, noticing as he did that several of the other students in the hallway were giving the heroics classroom similar disapproving looks. Now as he walked there, a bit more of a skip to his step. His time here at UA was truly going to be a fresh start for the young man. He was going to be away from the teens who had an issue with him, surrounded by people who at best were already his friends, and at worst held a neutral impression of him. A new start for the next part of his journey to becoming a hero. Not too long after passing 1A, the three friends entered their own classroom. 1B was by no means silent, with everyone sitting at their desks and staring at the board in front of them like mannequins. Nor were they as loud as their sister class. Instead, there was a light murmur going around as the students chatted politely with each other, some talking with a bit more energy, yet smiling all the same. Only a few seemed to be sitting peacefully on their own, either reading a book or scrolling on their smartphone. Entering the room, Izuku noticed several heads turned to look at the group entering. One of them, a girl with shoulder-length green hair and a shark-toothed grin, raised an eyebrow at this, but seemed to say nothing about it. She just went back to talking to another student whose head reminded Izuku of a comic bubble. However, there was another teen in the room who kept his focus on Midoriya, a bespectacled teen whose quirk gave him the appearance of a beast man of sorts. Then, just as Izuku found an empty desk, the hairy teen spoke up. "Ah, I remember you," in a polite tone. "You were the one that got called out during the entrance exam." A few teens stopped talking, turning their attention towards Izuku, who was beginning to sink into his seat. Already he was fearing for the worst, that instance could have given some of his classmates a poor impression of him already. "Why, yeah, that was me," Izuku admitted, hoping to remedy any negative thoughts that people here had of him with an honest apology. "Sorry if my mumbling bothered you. It's sort of a habit I have when I'm deep in thought." The beast man simply shook his head. "Oh no. I was hardly bothered at all, my good sir," replied the teen, dismissively waving his hand as he spoke. "To be perfectly frank, I barely heard a thing. Rather, I found our fellow examinee's actions rather disagreeable. He had every right to ask Sir Present Mike his question. Yet there was no reason to assume that it was a misprint. At least not until the end of the explanation. And he certainly had no grounds to single you out in such a manner. At least not for something so minor. If your mumbling bothered him that much, the proper way he should have handled it would have been to seek you out afterward to have words in private." The teen then paused, giving Izuku a friendly smile that showed off some of his sharpened canines. "Oh, where are my manners today? Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jiroda Shishida. It is a pleasure to see you here." Izuku, only slightly surprised by the teen's overly polite manner of speaking, returned the smile as he reached out to shake the teen's hand, which Jiroda accepted. "Thank you," said the green-haired teen. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." Just then, another student in the room spoke up, one wearing a bandana. "Yeah, I remember that guy," he said. "Kind of hard to forget such a stuck-up jerk. I bet it's because someone rammed a stick right up his goddamn." Before he could finish, a vine from one of Izuku's female classmates reached out to smack the boy right across the cheek. "Woman, what the heck is your problem? First of all, please refrain from using the Lord's name in vain," said the girl whose hair was literally made out of thorny vines. "It is disrespectful towards the Creator. Second, never again refer to me as woman again. My name is Ibara Shiozaki. I don't care who you are. Just don't slap me again, goddamn." Izuku watched as this time several vines were sent flying toward the face of the bandana-wearing teen, one to stop less than an inch away from his face. All of them were positioned so that they could, if Shiozaki wanted to, strike him from multiple directions at once. And it seemed that the teen realized this as well as he gulped loudly before raising his hands in a surrendering manner. Okay. We're all good here. We're all friends. So how about you put away the thorny vines?" Okay. The vine-haired girl said nothing in response, only giving her fellow classmate a slightly irritated look as he began to push one of the tendrils away from him. After a moment or two, the various thorn-covered vines retreated. As the class let out a sigh of relief, another teen with oval-shaped eyes and brown hair spoke up. "Yeah, that guy was pretty intense. I just remember thinking at the time, if he gets that annoyed now, what's he going to do when he becomes a sidekick or a pro? But he has nothing on the dude that was in my testing zone." Guy goes flying out of the gate, explosions coming out of his palms, and gets right to destroying all the robots fast. All while screaming "die" at the top of his lungs and looking like he was raised by feral wolves. "I think I met that guy." Shroom, said one of the girls in his class. Like the girl he had saved at the entrance exam. She had brown hair, but the bangs were longer, so that they covered her eyes. It was also interesting as, now that Izuku was really looking at it, her hair reminded him of a mushroom. Did he have blonde hair, red eyes, and a face that seemed stuck on angry? Shroom. That or someone smeared dog droppings under his nose, said the oval-eyed teen with a nod. But yeah, that sounds like the guy. Hearing that caused the mushroom-haired girl to groan as she sank in her seat. I nearly bumped into him right before the entrance exam. He was calling everyone extras and telling us if we got in his way he'd murder us. Shroom. I was hoping he was just full of hot air and would fail, but from the sounds of it, he got in. Shroom. Before the conversation could go on any further, the bell rang as the door opened once more to reveal a rather tall white-haired man dressed in a red hero costume. As he made his way toward the front of the classroom, the students became quiet while giving him their full attention. "All right," said the man after giving the class a once-over. "Seems like everyone is here. That's good. Allow me to be the first to welcome you in person to the hero course here at US starting today. I will be assisting you on your journey to becoming the next generation of heroes as your homeroom instructor. My name is Sekijiro Kan, but I would prefer it if you just called me by my hero name, Vlad King. Now, we have a busy day today. The opening ceremony will be starting soon, and I don't want us to be late." A few minutes later, 1B made their way out into the hallway. Almost as soon as he was outside, Izuku could almost feel a hateful stare directed at him. Turning around, he noticed that the students of 1A were milling their way out into the halls, albeit heading off in the opposite direction. And, standing in the middle of the hallway with eyes filled with the fury of hell itself, was Bakugo. The ashen blonde's teeth gritted tightly as he clutched at a gym uniform. As for the boy's stance, it was one Midoriya was painfully familiar with. One that said that any moment the red-eyed teen would come charging at him, using his explosion to close to the distance. For a moment, Izuku's body twitched in fear as their eyes locked. He had been aware of Bakugo's ever-increasing anger towards him since the day they had received their test results. How could he not when the explosive blonde did nothing to hide it? Oh yes, Izuku was still afraid of this one. Even after all the leaps and bounds he had done to improve his body, to hone a fighting style that would make him a hero, and even managing to knock him down once, that fear still remained. The memories of pain that Bakugo had inflicted on him seemed to be imprinted onto his very soul. Seeing that he was falling behind the rest of his class, the sacred gear user took a deep breath to calm his nerves. Then, Izuku turned and walked away. "Deku!" screamed Bakugo, his voice easily being carried down the halls and over the students. In fact, several students and teachers turned to look at the deranged-looking teen who was frothing at the mouth. "Don't you dare turn your back on me, you freak." Biting his lower lip, Midoriya continued to walk without turning around, though he remained tense and ready for a possible explosion right to his back. Thankfully, Izuku made it to the welcoming ceremony without incident. There, all the students stood at attention save for one class. Out of the corner of his eye, the green-haired youth noticed some of the other hero course students glancing over at the spot where one was supposed to be with pity. Others, well, seemed like they were taking bets, and he heard a few whispers that sounded like 1 student expulsion and 5 students expelled max. What kind of reputation did one have? Before the teen could begin to ponder this, mumbling under his breath the entire time, the opening ceremony began. It was there that Izuku saw the principal for the first time. He had heard that Nezu was an animal that had been experimented on, and that he was a mixture of several different animals. Yet it was another thing to see the bear dog mouse walking to the podium in a suit with a scar over one of his eyes. "To our new and old students, I welcome all of you to UA, said Nezu in a cheerful tone. "I hope you are all ready for another exciting year of learning. Before we begin the ceremony proper, I would like to make a sad announcement, as one of our veteran staff members shall be stepping down. After her many years of healing both students and pros alike, Recovery Girl has decided that she shall be retiring to live out the rest of her days with her friends and family in peace. While she will be remaining here for the next week or two, so that she can get her affairs in order, I would like to say now that she shall be sorely missed. That she is a reminder to us all that you don't need a powerful and destructive quirk to be a true hero." Izuku found himself shocked by this announcement. The Recovery Girl was retiring. The youthful heroine who had saved countless lives with her quirk was leaving UA. Looking up at the stage, he saw the old woman with a cane tear up slightly at the comment. But she wiped the tear away before lightly waving to a crowd that all voiced their gratitude for all she had done. "Thankfully, we have managed to find another hero with a powerful healing quirk to take her place," continued Nezu. meaning that the teachers won't have to hold back due to fear of excessive injuries. At that, the small animal began to laugh wildly as he threw back his head. And he continued to do that until Recovery Girl whacked him on the head with her cane, while also giving him a disapproving look. Oh, I'm going to miss those. Now, while our new nurse has yet to arrive, we do have another teacher that is here ready to teach. Please welcome Japan's #1 hero, All Might. With that, the symbol of peace walked onto the stage dressed in a pin-striped suit. He smiled brightly as he walked onto the stage, causing the entire crowd to explode with excitement. In one case that was literal, as one student exploded into a cloud of confetti before reforming himself. As for Izuku, he was beside himself as he pulled out his notebook from somewhere and held it tight to his chest. Perhaps, if he was lucky, he would get All Might to sign it. He may have found his own path to becoming a hero, and had stopped trying to imitate the great hero that was All Might. But that didn't mean the man wasn't his all-time favorite hero. From there, things proceeded as normal. A few speeches, singing the school's anthem, and so forth. When it was over, Vlad told his class to get changed in the locker room and then to meet him outside. While he didn't give them a time limit, he did stress not to take too long. 15 minutes later, Izuku stood in a line with the rest of his class in the vast fields behind the school. To his right was Itsuka, while Pony bounced on her hooves to his left, excited about what else they were going to be doing today. Thankfully, they didn't need to wait long as Vlad came out, rolling a large chart full of balls. He looked at them, nodding in approval. "Good, you all made it out here in a decent amount of time," said the pro hero with a slight smirk. "For first years, of course. Now then, today we're going to have a little bit of fun. Quirk dodgeball." With that, the large man grabbed one of the balls from the cart before flinging it at Itsuka. Thinking quickly, the orange-haired girl activated her quirk to enlarge her hand to its full size. Just in the nick of time as she easily caught the ball before wrapping it up in a fist. Everyone else looked on in surprise at what the man had done before excitement took over. Almost as one, the group let out a cheer, some even jumping in the air at the prospect of being given permission to use their quirks. "Before you get too excited, there are a few ground rules," Vlad King continued. "First and foremost, I don't want to see anyone throwing the balls with the intent to cause harm. I know that accidents happen, but if I see any of you doing anything that would intentionally cause one of your classmates harm, then we're going to be having a problem. And trust me, I'll know when you've done something like that. Second, standard rules of dodgeball apply here. See that line over there that divides the field in half? Neither team can cross it, nor can you leave the field unless you are out. You're out if you get hit by the ball, or if your opponent catches the ball you threw at them. Now, if you have a ball, you can use it to deflect incoming attacks. Once you are out, please leave the area and sit down on the side. This should go without saying, but if you are out, you are forbidden to use your quirks to help your team." Shishida then raised his hand. "Sir Vlad, how will we be deciding the teams?" "I don't want us wasting too much time on this, so we'll go by seat numbers," replied the homeroom teacher with a small shrug. "Evens on the right side with odds on the other." Excited, Izuku rushed over to the right side of the field. Soon, he was greeted by a teen with black skin and white hair who introduced himself as Shihei Kiwaro. Moments later, two more walked over to them. One of them was the green-haired girl who playfully introduced herself as Setsuna Takage, while the other, a pale teen without lips, said his name was Juzo Honuki. Quickly joining them after that was a dark-haired teen named Hiryu Rin. Next came Senkai Bara, who seemed more than a little laid back about the whole thing, followed by Shiozaki. The final three made their way to the group. A teen that was a bit on the smaller side named Nirangeki Shoda, a quiet dark-haired girl named Yui Kodai, and the oval-eyed Kosai Tsuburaba. It was a little upsetting to not be with people he knew like Pony or Itsuka. Heck, he wasn't even with Shishida, who was the only one in the class besides the girls he had an actual conversation with. Yet those feelings were pushed to the side as he told himself that this was the beginning of his journey here at UA, a brand new start for him. So he was going to use this as a chance to make new friends. "Okay, so how do we want to do this?" asked Tsuburaba once they had all gathered around. "Just go in and everyone for themselves. That's how we always did it back in middle school, I guess." "To be honest, this really isn't my game," said Kiwaro as he dug his hands into his pockets. Izuku nervously raised his hand, instantly getting an eye roll from Setsuna. "Dude, if you have something to say then spit it out," she said, slightly annoyed. "We're all equal here, so you don't need permission." Oh, okay," said Izuku before he paused to take a deep breath. This seemed to calm his nerves, allowing him to speak with far more confidence than he really felt. I think that's a bad idea. Since quirks will be involved, we should have a strategy in place to prevent our quirks from interfering with each other. Plus, it would allow us to take down the other team more effectively. Takage hummed slightly as she nodded, clearly agreeing with the idea. Did you have something in mind? Well, in order to make a proper plan, we need to know what we can all do, began Izuku. I'll go first. My quirk is called Divine Dividing. It allows me to steal half of the strength and power of whoever I'm touching once every 10 seconds. It also gives me wings to store the excess energy I can't handle with my own body, and allows me to fly. Oh, and I have some training in martial arts. Everyone looked at Izuku with wide eyes, barely blinking as Izuku quickly spoke. Then, finally, Takage broke out into a wide grin. Well dang, she said as she revealed all for her sharp teeth. That sounds really awesome. Well, check this out. My quirk is called Lizard Tail Splitter. From there, everyone gave out their quirks one after another along with any other detail they could come up with that might help. Izuku adopted a thinking pose, hand on his chin, as he mentally processed everything that he heard. With each new quirk and skill he heard, a plan was being created. When they finished explaining everything, Izuku wasted no time explaining what he had come up with. Most took it at face value except Takage and Honuki, who pointed out areas where they had issues with. Of course, Izuku had no issue with this, as he welcomed their criticisms and opinions. Finally, a few minutes later, Ken had finished placing several balls along the line that divided the teams. Izuku had one foot on the edge of the back section of the field. His eyes locked on a smirking Istuka, who seemed eager for this match. And begin, yelled Ken. As the odds team ran forward to grab the balls, Honuki placed both hands on the ground with a wicked grin. Instantly, the ground underneath their opponent's feet began to soften, causing them to sink as if in quicksand. At the same time, Takage and Shiozaki began to use their quirks to get the balls, with Setsuna separating her body apart into small masses and flying over to grab the orbs, while the Christian girl used her vines to do the same. Sure, it was simple and straightforward, but it did the trick. While the odd team had been taken aback by this, they by no means were willing to give up. Pony had been the first to act, using her horn cannon quirk to launch the horns out of her head and sent them to collect one of the balls. Meanwhile, a silver-haired girl reached out a hand before a couple of the balls began to levitate toward her. Yet, despite this, Izuku's team had managed to collect more balls. Once all the balls were collected, it became an all-out war. Honuki deactivated his quirk, the opposing team half stuck in now very solid ground, making it harder to move. Shoto was first to act, punching the ball at his opponents before using his double-impact quirk to give it a boost. The attack hit its target, while another ball thrown by Rin was flung forward only to be caught by one of Kendo's massive hands. With the Dragon Scale user out, Kendo chucked the captured ball right at Tsuburaba, who used his solid air quirk to block. While this was going on, Izuku took flight into the air, as the next part of their plan was ready. A few members of the opposite team noticed this, their eyes wide in surprise at the wings that had appeared on their green-haired classmate's back. However, they quickly dismissed him upon noticing that he held no ball in either hand. Was he supposed to get a bird's-eye view or something? Once Midoriya was high enough, he looked down into his hand to see several marble-sized objects within his palm. Smiling to himself, Izuku quickly looked down at where Kodai stood, who responded with a nod. Seeing this, Izuku flung the marbles down at the opposite team, while his own began to throw the remaining balls they had at their disposal. Given the size of the objects Izuku had flung at them, it was not surprising that the Evens team didn't see them or recognize them as a threat, as they instead prepared for the incoming ground assault. That was their mistake, as Kodai began to press her fingertips together, returning the size of the balls she had shrunk and given to Izuku back to their normal size. Balls rained down on the Itsuka's team, taking out over 2/3 of the students there. Yet, despite how many had gotten hit, one person had seen it coming: Itsuka. The girl had kept her eye on Izuku the entire time, wondering what he was up to. And while she had been too late to put the pieces together, she had reacted quickly enough to grab one of the balls he had thrown at them, and using it to block an attack from Kiwara. As Vlad called out that Izuku was out, the two gave each other a look and a nod before the flying team left the field to watch the rest of the match, which they eventually won. Class 1B played 2 more matches of dodgeball that day. Who won after that? Nobody really cared, as they were all having way too much fun to care about little things like that. And, when they left, the class felt more like a group of friends than anything else. I'm doomed. There's no point in denying it, wailed Tetsutetsu. Izuku looked up from his lunch, his attention now focused on his classmate, who sat directly across from him at the table, not touching his own meal. Rather, Tetsu just sat there with his hands running through his hair as he stared wide-eyed into empty space. His expression looked like he had just seen all his worst nightmares come to life, combining themselves in order to throw the steel-hardening hero in training into a new level of terror. Midoriya was not the only one to notice this, as several of the other people who sat there looked on with concern. Sir Tetsu, come now, said Shishida politely, one of his hands gesturing to the steel quirk user as he did so. There is no need to be so overly dramatic. It's only the second day of school and… That's just it, exclaimed Tetsu, interrupting his classmate while running his fingers through his hair. It's only the second day of school, and I'm already feeling lost. The classes here are harder than… Look, I barely passed the written portion of the exam. I had to guess over half the questions. I think I understood some of the stuff they told us in class, but only bits and pieces here and there. And it's only going to get harder as the year goes on. How am I going to pass the finals? Oh man, they're going to kick me out. That got a hum out of one of the last guys sitting in their section of that table. Honuki. Izuku watched as the recommendation student closed his eyes while crossing his arms across his chest. Since the dodgeball game yesterday, Izuku had been eager to get to know more about the softening quirk user. A gesture that had touched Honuki, as he thought that it would take a while for some people to get over how different he looked. But Izuku hadn't been bothered by it. And when he found out that Honuki was bilingual, able to speak both Japanese and English, Izuku quickly introduced him to Pony, who was happy to meet another person who could speak her native tongue. Finally, Honuki spoke. Well, it's only our first day of classes. I'm sure sooner or later you'll get the hang of it. Maybe just spend more time studying. I guess, replied Tetsu with a sigh. But I suck at studying. I always get distracted and end up lifting weights or working out. Tetsu, if you are having trouble, you can always ask us for help, said Kendo, who was sitting next to Izuku, while waving a finger in the air. We're your classmates. My dad has this saying, one who is truly strong knows when to ask for help. At the same time, Pony, who had been sitting next to Kendo, leaned forward to look at Tetsu with those wide, excited eyes of hers. Oh, I know. Ask Izuku to help you study. He helped me improve my Japanese big time. And made it fun too. That got Tetsu's attention. Lowering his hands, he looked at Midoriya with hope returning in his eyes. Really? Can you help? Dude, you would be a real lifesaver. Izuku didn't say anything at first, simply putting his utensils down as he adopted a thinking pose. It wasn't that he was against helping out his classmate, as he was eager to have a fresh start and make more friends while on the road to becoming a hero. It was more like he didn't know if he could do the same for him as he did for Pony. He had used her interests to bridge the gap in her education. So could he? Well, if the problem is just that he gets distracted easily, then maybe studying in a group might be the best solution, pondered Midoriya aloud in a low mutter. More people around him keep him focused and on task. But will that be enough? Tetsu did mention the gym and working out. UA does have several gyms that are open to all students after hours. Perhaps we could reserve one of them for an hour or so every night so we can go over what we learned while lifting weights or on the treadmill. Get a workout and learn at the same time. Might be a problem with our focus so divided. But as long as we don't push ourselves too much, we should get in a good workout both mentally and physically. Though, is he always like this? Asked Honuki. Caught off guard by the sudden interruption, while in the zone, Izuku nearly jumped out of his seat. Looking around, the Divine Divider saw that everyone was staring at him. Kendo, for example, was resting her head on her fist as she watched him ramble on with a soft smile on her face that caused his cheeks to tint red. Pony had stars in her blue eyes while Honuki seemed worried. Shishida had a hand on his chin as he looked at his classmate, his expression almost hidden. And as for Tetsu, dude, where were you when I was studying to get into UA? The teen asked excitedly, hands balled into fists, while an open smile that showed off his sharp teeth was present. That actually sounds like fun. I can't wait to get started. Well, before you get too excited, we need to find out if it's possible, said Itsuka as she sat up straight. We need to talk to the teachers about reserving time at one of the gyms, and we might not be able to get it every day. But I am pretty sure that we'll be able to get some time in the library pretty easily. Right, agreed Izuku as he nodded at his orange-haired friend, his body relaxing as a smile appeared on his face. We should also ask the rest of the class to see if anyone needs any additional help. Or, at the very least, wants to join. We have a group chat for our class, so I guess one of us could post it there and… Deku. A half second after the green-haired teen heard that familiar scream of rage, his face was slammed onto the table and into his food. Struggling to breathe, the teen felt his body slide across the surface, followed by empty air for a brief moment before finally crashing into the ground. Coughing, Izuku managed to turn his head slightly, just in time to see the feral visage of his attacker, Katsuki Bakugo, as he had already leapt over the table. His brain was still processing what was happening as an open palm slammed into the back of his head, pressing down with great force, while a knee pressed down on the Divine Divider's wrist. It has been so long since he had been in this position. Not since he first activated Divine Dividing, standing up to his bully for the first time since the playground. But now, taken aback by the suddenness of the attack, Izuku found himself paralyzed with fear. He couldn't move. Thoughts as complex as pushing him off were too complicated at this moment. He could only lay there, feeling like his old self as he looked up in the corner of his eye at the person who had made his childhood a living nightmare. "You damned, useless nerd," screamed Bakugo, veins already in his eyes as he spat down at the teen beneath him. "Worthless stain. Damned Deku. Did you think we were done? Did you? Did you think I wouldn't see how close you were to my entrance score? With damned rescue points? Still looking down on me? Trying to make me look bad?" More pressure was added to Izuku's face, squishing it further into the ground. His bones were feeling like they were put into a press with the potential for them to break at any given moment. Only now could he hear movement all around him, shoes squeaking against the floor. But his eyes refused to look away from the angry red eyes above him, even as spit flew from Bakugo's mouth every time he yelled. There was no mistaking it. Bakugo was beyond angry or livid. It was something else, and it scared Izuku that there could be another level of anger within the teen. More fear was added as the teen tried to reach Bakugo with his other hand, but to no avail. From this position, his attacker was out of his reach. "Now, you are going to answer my question, you pathetic waste of space," demanded Bakugo as heat began to emanate from him palm. Heat that Midoriya knew all too well despite not experiencing it in some time. "Then you are going that your worthless ass out of my school. Either by you walking out on your own 2 feet, or in a body bag." "That is highly uncalled for," came Shishida's voice. "Cease this utterly barbaric behavior, my good sir. Mind your own business, Sasquatch," yelled Bakugo without taking his eyes off of Izuku. "Well, we tried to do this the civil way," said Itsuka. Half a second later, the sound of flesh hitting flesh filled the lunchroom as Bakugo was knocked off of Izuku, tumbling onto the floor before rolling into a crouching position. Looking over to his side, the teen saw that it had been Itsuka who had come to his rescue. Her normal-sized fist still extended, she looked down at the ashen-haired teen with contempt. Then, after glancing back at Bakugo, Izuku saw a large bruise forming, while a trickle of blood escaped from his lips. "You damned extra. If you want to die so badly, then so be it," growled Bakugo, palms open as several mini-explosions began to appear in his hands. Izuku nearly trembled where he was as he saw the flash in Bakugo's eyes. He also noted that the others who had been seated at their table had already risen, determination in their eyes as the silence filled the room. Thankfully, something came in the nick of time to prevent things from escalating. That thing happened to be long bands of some sort of white cloth. They wrapped around Bakugo, pressing the teen's arms against his body as he fell to the ground. Everyone looked up to see, at the other end of the cloth, a man with long shaggy black hair and glowing red eyes. At the same time, another person came running towards Izuku, which caused a brief surge of panic in the teen. Though he did relax a little when he saw that it was the girl he had saved back in the entrance exam, her eyes filled with concern at what had happened. "Oh my, I saw what happened," said the brown-haired girl with the permanent blush. "Are you all right, Deku?" As the other 1B students looked at Uraraka in shock, Izuku felt his heart sink deep into an abyss. Tears threatened to form in his eyes as he looked up at her. This was supposed to be a fresh start for him, a new beginning. That he could go the next 3 years without anyone calling him Deku. Well, everyone but Bakugo. But now, if she was already calling him that, how long till everyone else started calling him useless? He must really look pathetic. He was taken out so easily, froze in fear, and needed someone else to save him. Some hero in training, he turned out to be. Breathing quickly, Izuku did the only thing he could think of. Get away from everyone. He was aware he said something, yet the words didn't seem to register in his mind as he got to his feet before charging out of the lunchroom. No doubt everyone was watching him, judging him harshly. But he didn't have the mentality to worry about that now as he left the room, and only stopped when he got to the first intersection in the hallway. Once he stopped, Izuku bent slightly as he panted, while resting his hands on his knees. He could hear Albion trying to talk to him. But his voice was jumbled within his mind. With each breath, he tried to clear it. Tried to get his thoughts in order, and to think clearly. "I was right about you," came a cold, emotionless voice from behind him. "You don't belong here." All sound in Izuku's head vanished when he heard those words. Slowly he turned to see a man dressed in all black, his long and unkempt hair matching his attire. Quickly Izuku realized that this was the person who had stepped in, the cloth in one hand as he led Bakugo with him. But now the man's gaze was upon the divine divider, giving him a look that Izuku knew all too well. He was being judged. "I saw that pathetic display of yours in the entrance exam," he continued, moving in closer to Izuku as his eyes flashed red. "You clearly have little understanding of how to use your quirk properly and wasted time figuring it out on the battlefield. Did you even practice it at all? And now this." Izuku could feel his heart beating faster, his legs becoming shaky as the man continued to glare at him. Words tried and failed to form in the teen's mouth, creating further annoyance in the man standing before him. Said man then took a step closer. "The only reason you are still here is that you were not placed in my class," said the man, now almost directly in front of Izuku. "Believe me, I would have removed you on the first day for being a Aizawa, that's enough." As the words were spoken, the large meaty hand of Vlad King slammed into Aizawa's shoulder. This act had surprised both Bakugo and Izuku, neither of whom even noticed the man approaching. But not Oiaza, who simply turned to give the taller man an annoyed look. For a while, neither man said anything before the dark man began to walk away with Bakugo in tow. Then, "You know I'm right." And with that, Aizawa walked away from the pair with Bakugo in tow, without looking back. "Tea?" asked Kan. Not trusting his voice, Izuku nodded his head as he kept his eyes on the small table, separating him from his homeroom teacher. The young man just sat there on a couch in the teacher's lounge, his standard uniform replaced with his gym tracksuit. He was aware that the door was locked, giving them privacy that did little to calm the teen down. As he heard the tea being poured into their cups, his mind went to all of the worst-case scenarios. No doubt Vlad was going to expel him like how that other teacher had wanted. Just in a calmer atmosphere, why wouldn't they? The school had just seen how pathetic he had handled a sneak attack, followed by the way he had reacted. Clearly, they would say that he wasn't cut out for the hero course if he couldn't handle that. And with Albion now going silent, he felt all the more certain that he was right. Perhaps even the soul of the ancient dragon no longer wanted anything to do with him. Then, the tea was placed before Izuku. "I want to apologize for what Aizawa said to you," said Vlad King in a gentle tone, one that seemed to contradict his very appearance. "It was certainly something you didn't need to hear after what you just went through. Though harsh, the man means well." Izuku said nothing as he took up his cup and took a sip, his eyes still downcast. Then, after a moment, he spoke. "Was he right?" began Izuku before pausing to swallow the lump in his throat. "Is the reason I'm even still here because you didn't place me in his class?" For a moment, silence filled the room. Despite not looking up at the man before him, he knew there was no doubt a war going on in Vlad King's brain. To be honest, lie, or deflect. Then, finally, the man spoke. "It is possible," said Vlad with a heavy sigh. "Aizawa has a bit of a reputation for expelling students that do not meet his standards, regardless of how well they do in the entrance exam. One time he even expelled an entire class. But, despite this, he does not want to expel you." Midoriya looked up in surprise, nearly dropping his tea as he stared at the man in disbelief. Now he saw that his homeroom teacher was holding the small cup in his hands, looking down at it with his eyes half-lit, as if remembering something. "He was critical of how much time you wasted during the exam," continued the blood-themed hero. "How you did not use your quirk right away, and, when you did use it, you began flying around out of control. With that said, he was mildly impressed that you managed to get some control over it in such a short amount of time. That as well as taking down the zero-pointer without getting hurt, or putting anyone else's well-being at risk. So he recommended that you be sent into general studies with the option to be moved into the hero course, once you got a better handle on your quirk. However, myself, Principal Nezu, and the other teachers felt otherwise." The large man then paused to take a sip from his drink. Then, when he looked at Izuku again, there was something of curiosity in his gaze. "Now, I'm sure you know that UA does background checks on all of our students for obvious reasons," he said, Izuku simply nodding back in confirmation. "Normally, we scrutinize any reported misconduct ranging from quirk misusage to arrests. If we require a better understanding of the situation, or that said potential student has learned and moved on. Then that student is called in so we can question them. Others we simply discard without a second thought. But perhaps some of us pay a little too much attention to that part and miss other things. Like, for example, both myself and Nezu noticed that you changed your quirk registration almost a year ago. And, originally, you were declared quirkless. Izuku nodded again before going into the story he had told so many people thus far. How he had discovered that the reason everyone, including himself, had thought that he was quirkless was that his body hadn't been strong enough to handle his quirk. He intentionally remained vague on how he had discovered this, not wanting there to be more bad blood between himself and Bakugo. And, thankfully, Vlad never pressed the issue, nor did he interrupt his student as he continued the story of how hard he worked to get his body into shape, about how, at the entrance exam, he wasn't 100% sure that divine dividing worked on machines, as well as wanting to see what he could do on his own. And that when he did activate his quirk, was the first time he had discovered the wings, and, well, the first time he had ever flown. It was only when Izuku had finished his story that Vlad spoke once more, his voice filled to the brim with understanding. I see. From what I am hearing, your quirk is still developing. No doubt due to coming in so late in the game. Well, considering that, I'm honestly a bit more impressed that you came so far in such a short amount of time. Now you have me curious to see what you'll be like at the end of the year. Izuku could now see an almost feral grin on Vlad's face. But, unlike Bakugo's feral expressions, this one held less of the murderous glint in the eyes, and was replaced with excitement. Seeing it almost flew Izuku through a loop. But before the teen could dwell on it much longer, Vlad's expression softened. I'm sure it wasn't easy thinking you were quirkless for so long, said the pro-hero softly. It wasn't. Izuku's words cracked as he began to deny the truth of what it had been like. To dismiss it all like it had just been no big deal. A bit of rain that ruined what was supposed to be a sunny day. But his own voice had already betrayed him, and already the pro-hero sitting before him was giving him a look that said he already didn't buy that. So, Izuku spoke honestly. Deku. I don't know if anyone told you, but that's the name Bakugo called me. It's the name a lot of people knew me as growing up. Useless. That's how I was made to feel for years. I was mocked for just wanting to have the same dreams as the rest of my class. For just wanting to help people. That's all I wanted to do. Yeah, I was stupid for not working out more if I wanted to be a hero. I realized that a while ago. I eventually did put in the hard work, but maybe I'll always be a Deku. If I freeze up like I did in the lunchroom, unable to fight back, then how can I ever be expected to do the same when I'm fighting a real live villain? Maybe Mr. Aizawa is right, and I should just. Izuku was silenced when Vlad reached across the table to gently place a hand on his shoulder. Midoriya, you are certainly not the first student I've seen freeze up when taken by surprise, said the man firmly. And you certainly won't be the last. I won't hold it against you, especially since you were in a place where you thought you were safe. So go a little easier on yourself, and we can work on it. Oh, really? Asked Izuku. Of course, said Kan with a nod, while removing his hand from Izuku's shoulder as he leaned back into his seat. We train our heroes to deal with a number of different situations that can happen out in the field. That includes how to deal with unexpected attacks. Now, how are you feeling? Izuku blinked at that. Slowly, it began to dawn on him that he was feeling better. The panic he had been feeling was lessening, his mind now thinking far more clearly. Like how that girl had called him Deku. Of course, she didn't know his name as they had never really spoken. She no doubt heard Bakugo screaming it at the top of his lungs and, for some reason, assumed it was his name. Hopefully thinking it was his surname or something. Looking back at his homeroom teacher, Izuku saw a sad smile on the face of the blood-themed hero. I sort of know what you're going through, said Vlad King. Believe it or not, I was bullied pretty bad back before I started my hero training. Again, Izuku blinked at what he heard, while his mouth hung open slightly. Why you were? Asked Izuku, mouth slightly hanging open as his mind tried to process this. He knew a lot about the career of Vlad King. While not to the extent of All Might, but he did have several pages dedicated to the man sitting before him in a notebook back home. And in all the videos as well as pictures and articles he had seen the man in, Vlad King always appeared so strong, so powerful and focused. It was mind-blowing to even consider that anyone would think to bully him. Vlad King, however, nodded. A lot of people get unnerved by blood quirks, began the man as he looked down into his teacup. It's a primal thing to grow uneasy when you see it. 10 times more so when there's a scrawny kid that can manipulate his own blood. Got pushed around a lot, bullied, and called things like that creepy vampire. One day I even found jars of pig blood stuffed into my locker. the people around me laughing it up and asking if that was my lunch. Izuku gulped as a question burned in his mind. Did leaving that place help? He asked. It did, replied Vlad King as he looked back up at his student. When I started my hero training, I found that most of the people there were more accepting of me. Those that weren't didn't get very far. Some of them never made it past sidekick when they graduated. But some of that stuff stuck with me. Especially the things they said to me. There would be times when I could almost hear their voices in the back of my head. Then there were times when I would just snap at people when they made certain comments. It's not as easy to escape that kind of stuff. It just seems to haunt you like a ghost, appearing and disappearing without a trace. See, can I ask how you were able to get past that? Asked Izuku. Of course, answered Vlad with a smile, one that showed off his fangs. The first thing I needed to do was admit that what they said hurt. Let it out. Then I found friends I could talk to, ones I trusted, and who were willing to listen to me vent when I needed it. And, finally, I took the names they used to insult me and I owned them. It's the reason I decided that my hero name would be a reference to the inspiration of Dracula. Once I owed it, I took away all the power those people had. Shortly after that, Izuku Midoriya left the teacher's lounge feeling infinitely better. He managed to head back to the classroom where a worried Itsuka and Pony were waiting for him along with the rest of the class. He was embarrassed yet glad at the same time to see that there were so many people who were worried about him. That ruffian, declared Shishida as he adjusted his glasses. Attacking anyone when their back is turned is the mark of a coward. I knew he was bad news. Shroom, cried Komori, her own hands balled into fists. I'm just glad he's in 1A. Can you imagine what would have happened if he was here with us? Or if Midoriya was in 1A with him? Shroom. Izuku smiled at their words. So, does anyone know what happened to Bakugo? He asked as he turned to the rest of the class. The guy who attacked me. Itsuka made a face that showed she wasn't happy. Yeah, Takage overheard some of the teachers while we were looking for you. As if to punctuate that statement, Takage's eyes and ears separated from her body and began to move around on their own, along with her mouth that was twisted into a sharp-toothed grin as Kendo continued to talk. According to her, Principal Nezu was furious about the attack and wanted to expel that Bakugo kid. But that jerk Aizawa stepped in and managed to get him a suspension. He'll be back when they start rescue training in a couple of days. Oh, that's bullshit. This statement by Awase was quickly shared by the rest of the class. Even Shiozaki seemed enraged with this, her hair slashing around like dozens of angry snakes. It seemed like too much of a slap on the wrist for attacking another student completely unprovoked. But perhaps there was going to be more to his punishment, like he would be missing something important in class or something. Some of the class even wondered if the reason they didn't expel the jerk was that the school feared unleashing such a ticking time bomb on the world. However, their speculations had to be put on hold as Vlad entered the room, ready to give a lecture on proper heroing laws. The next day, 1B discovered what the angry blonde had missed out on as the door opened, and All Might himself almost seemed to soar into the room before landing in front of Vlad's podium. Stars were in Izuku's eyes as he looked up at the number 1 hero. He stood there, dressed in his current hero costume, while making a V for victory sign as a bright smile shone on his face. Greetings, you bunch of newbies, announced the number 1 hero. I, All Might, am here to teach you the ropes in what I like to call Heroing 101. And, just like your sister class, I will be pulling no punches as we start our battle training. Izuku stood on the roof of a building within Training Ground Beta as he nervously counted the seconds until their first heroics training lesson began. Glancing over at his partner, the Divine Divider was glad to see that he wasn't the only one as Itsuka was doing some breathing exercises. Their objective in this exercise was simple. They were the heroes who had to break into a building housing a bomb held by a pair of villains. All they had to do was either touch the bomb or capture both villains before the time ran out. Easy. At least on paper, that is. They were going up against Takage and Kiruwaro. Not only that, but they were going to be the first group to do this exercise. With the entire class, plus All Might himself, watching them, judging them. We got this, came the voice of the big fist user. Izuku blinked, not realizing that Itsuka had closed the distance between them to place a hand on his shoulder, while giving him a warm smile. Seeing this helped him to relax a bit as well, though he blushed a bit as couldn't help but notice how heroic and alluring she looked in her hero costume. Looking down and placing a hand on his chest, he too began to feel a little more heroic at this moment, after what his orange-haired friend had told him almost a year ago about making his smile his own. The teen had workshopped his old hero costume to remove All Might's influence. Now he wore the finished product, a green suit, its color a lighter shade than what he originally wanted so as to not clash with his wings, with white markings on the side along the sides. On both legs, he wore white knee pads that went up to his thighs. The teen had removed the hood that held the hair bangs from his original design, as well as the mouth guard that looked like All Might's smile, much to the delight of Albion and Itsuka. Though Pony did sulk a little as she had thought that it looked really funny. In its place, now hanging around his neck, was a respirator shaped like a dragon's jaw. Now he looked more like his own hero, instead of a fanboy playing dress-up. Yeah, agreed Izuku with a nod. We got this. As Izuku said that, All Might announced the beginning of the match. Wasting no time, the green-haired teen activated his quirk, the large wings appearing on his back before he blushingly picked up his friend to carry her bridal style. With his friend in his arms, Izuku flew across the street, aiming toward one of the windows in the middle of the building, while one of Itsuka's fists grew to its maximum size. Once they arrived at their destination, Kendo wasted no time smashing the glass into thousands of pieces with a single punch. However, rather than going inside, Izuku flew upwards at the highest speed he felt comfortable at before landing on the roof. As Kendo used her enlarged fists to rip the roof access door off its hinges, Izuku deactivated his wings so that he could properly fit through the door. Their first plan had been simple: have Izuku fly around the building looking for the bomb, and then the two of them could just crash through that window. However, both agreed that that sort of plan would have worked better had he not shown everyone at the dodgeball game that he could fly. No doubt they would expect something like that. The same would go for the roof. So, instead, their plan was to try and divide their opponents. Hopefully, after hearing that crash, one of the villains would go to investigate, leaving the other to guard the bomb or the roof. As the pair moved through the top floor, they began to notice just how dark it was, the lights being turned off, while all the doors were kept shut. It was so dark that the two had to move a bit slower, while keeping a hand pressed against the wall. The two strained their ears as they listened for the slightest noise of their enemies approaching. As the two turned a corner, they were met by a floating eyeball. The two heroes stared at it, wide-eyed, thinking that their own eyes were playing tricks on them. That is until the eyeball blinked, causing both hero hopefuls to scream. As the pair backed away from what was the beginning of a horror movie, Izuku felt someone wrapping their arms around his neck. The fear of being taken by surprise filled the teen, his mind going numb as he looked to the side to see the haunting face of Kiwaro grinning at him, while showing off all his teeth. Izuku! As Itsuka yelled out his name, several small objects began to fly toward her. Quickly they combined to form a pair of hands that swiftly grabbed the big fist girl by the wrists. Kendo soon found herself being dragged and pressed against the wall by the severed hands across from the struggling Izuku. Then, several larger masses flew down the hallways along with a mouth that floated underneath the eye. Nice try with that distraction, said Setsuna's mouth. Good thing I left an eye over here, while the rest of me went to search the building. Struggling to get a full breath of air, Izuku reached up his hands to pry off the arms, denying him precious oxygen. Yet when he tried, Kiwaro simply began to tighten his chokehold. To make matters worse, Izuku got a front row seat to the fate that befell his partner. He watched as Itsuka struggled to push forward, to remove herself from the wall, to lower her arms so she could rip off Take's hands. However, much to the green-haired teen's mounting horror at the situation, the extra lumps of flesh began launching right into Kendo's gut. Itsuka, like all the air from her lungs, had been knocked out from the first attack, barely able to take another breath before the next piece of Setsuna stuck her. Over and over, these pieces struck before pulling back in a seemingly never-ending series of rapid-fire punches. It's over, hero, said Kiwaro as Izuku felt one of the arms let go. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it reach into the darkness where the rest of his enemy's body was most likely to be. Then, when he saw it next, in the dark villain's hand was the capture tape. Seeing the tape brought a moment of clarity to Izuku's mind, the desperate need for air forgotten. Once that capture tape was wrapped around him, he would lose. He would have to lie there, unable to participate in the rest of the exercise, leaving Itsuka to fend for herself against the two villains. Well, not if he could help it. So, with gritted teeth, Izuku tightened his grip on Kiwaro's arm that was around his neck. An action that surprised the dark teen. Then, divide, shouted Izuku as he activated his quirk. His wings extended to cancel out as much of the darkness in the hallway as possible. With no darkness for Kiwaro to sink back into, it was like he was being pushed out of the wall. Midoriya used this, adding his own strength to add to the momentum, while spinning the darkly clad teen and tossing him to the ground. A second later, Kiwaro's body hit the ground with enough force that it actually bounced. But before he could land on the ground a second time, Izuku was around in motion to continue his attack. The Divine Divider had spun around, lifting his leg high into the air as he did so before sending his heel right into the gut of his attacker. At the same time, Kendo was turning the tables on Setsuna. The orange-haired girl, despite the pain she had endured, began to push herself off the wall while growing her fists to their full size once more. With a fierce battle cry, she then began to swing both of her enlarged hands around, creating waves of wind that knocked Takeji's body parts around while irritating the lone eye. Then smack! Utsuka's hand came down, swatting several of the pieces in one go as though they were nothing more than a couple of annoying flies. Shrinking her hands, Kendo then ripped off the severed hands that still clung to her wrists before flinging them against the wall. At that point, Setsuna's eye and mouth were the only parts of her still afloat. Seeing that there was nothing else they could do, they tried to make a break for it only to discover that Izuku was blocking their path, as he had somehow gotten behind them. Takeji hesitated, and, at that moment, Itsuka had enlarged her hands once more to swat the last of the villain's pieces. With the fight over, Izuku looked over to see Itsuka holding her stomach with her once more normal-sized hands with a strained grin on her face. As she gave him a thumbs up, showing she was ready to continue, Izuku instantly returned the gesture. From there, the rest of the exercise was pretty easy. They found the bomb along with literally half of Setsuna, looking like various chunks of her body were missing. She tried to put up a fight, pieces of her body flying out at the two heroes in a vain attempt to keep them from the bomb. However, both Kendo and Midoriya were easily able to avoid the attacks thanks to all the Parker training they had done, touching the bomb with 5 minutes to spare. Once the match was over, all four were brought back to where the rest of the class was waiting for them. Their All Might heaped praise on all four of them for a splendid job, as both heroes and villains had good plans, while also making good use of their quirks. And while he did criticize Izuku for hesitating as long as he did when Kiwaro got the drop on him, he was overall glad that he overcame this. As for Izuku, he just nodded as basked in the glow of his own achievement, that he had been able to save himself, unlike what had happened with Bakugo. From there, the rest of the matches continued. Everyone in Class 1B gave Izuku a look as he pulled out a notebook from somewhere as he began taking notes on all the various quirks of his classmates and how they used them. The one that had impressed him the most was Pony, who had attached the capture tape to her horns before launching them into the air, guiding them to her target like a guided missile. Not only that, but when the ground had been covered by her opponent's glue, she had gotten over it by jumping on her floating horns and riding them over the obstacle. All in all, it had been a good day despite All Might racing away once the class was over. The next day, the students of 1B found themselves back in Training Ground Beta. Dressed in their hero costumes, they followed their homeroom teacher as he led them down the deserted streets. With their footsteps seeming to echo all around them, the place gave off a bit of a spooky vibe. "All right, class," said Vlad King as he led his class through the empty city. "Today, while 1A is doing rescue training at the USG, you will be learning how to deal with large-scale ambushes." Izuku flinched when Vlad King brought up the USG. They had all heard about the unforeseen simulation joint yesterday, after All Might's lesson from their homeroom teacher. A place that was designed to simulate entire disaster environments in a controlled setting for training purposes. When they heard this, the entire class had grown excited, though less so when the blood-themed hero said that he was trying to get a joint class training going with 1A. No doubt wanting to smooth tensions out between the two heroic classes. Well, obviously it didn't work out and Izuku couldn't help but feel like it was his fault. He could still remember the way Mr. Aizawa had spoken to him, making his feelings for the green-haired youth crystal clear. That, along with the fact that Bakugo was back from his suspension, his presence heard loud and clear, were the more likely reasons for 1A's homeroom teacher to reject the idea. "Hey," came Itsuka's whisper right into Izuku's ear, both the suddenness and the feeling of her warm breath almost causing him to jump. "Don't worry about it. We'll go to the USG another time." At that, Pony chimed in as she leaned close to whisper as well. "Yeah," she said, a little louder than Itsuka. "And we won't be keeping an eye out for that jerk." Glancing around, Midoriya saw that while they had been quiet, the rest of the class seemed to have heard this. Many of them were either nodding in agreement or just giving the Divine Divider a reassuring smile. Seeing that made Izuku relax a little. Maybe he was just thinking about this too hard. Perhaps the reason the idea was rejected was that there weren't enough teachers to watch over them. Vlad King, meanwhile, continued talking, as if he had not overheard anything. "This type of thing can be one of the most terrifying aspects of the job. I'm sure that many of you noticed it in the entrance exam. Examinees freezing or panicking when one of the robots suddenly appeared before them. It is that fear that you will be learning to overcome, to not hesitate when faced with danger. So are we going to be fighting the robots from the exam again? Asked Kiwara. No offense, Mr. Vlad, but we already know we can take them. Vlad turned his head to look at his student, a sadistic smile briefly appearing on his face. Yes, you did. But when you last fought them, you were in a group with the robots targeting whoever they first came across. This time, however, you will be facing a dozen or so robots alone that can appear at any time. Furthermore, we will be making those robots a bit tougher. All thanks to the support department. As if on cue, a three-pointer robot came racing down the street towards them at a speed much greater than they had shown during the entrance exam. What's more, there seemed to be someone riding on top of it. It was a girl with pink dreadlock-styled hair, her jacket tied around her waist to show off her tank top, and her arms raised high into the air. Drawing closer, Izuku took note of the homemade steampunk-like goggles on her forehead along with the various blotches of oil on her skin. Eventually, the robot came to a halt right in front of the group, which nearly caused the girl to go flying off. Class, allow me to introduce one of Power Loader's best first-year students in the support department. Mei Hatsune, announced Vlad King as he gestured to the girl who was now laughing her head off. She's here to make sure that the robots pack a bit more of a punch than what they did during the entrance exam. Mei suddenly stopped laughing, head snapping to look at the hero in red before blinking at that, though her insane grin never left her face. Really? Asked Hatsune in a weird, cheerful tone. Power Loader really said that about me. I thought he just wanted me out of the classroom after I blew it up for the 18th time. Pony, as well as the majority of the class, blinked at that. But we've only been at school for. Not that I mind, of course, exclaimed Mei, waving a hand around while interrupting the American girl. This is far more interesting than listening to another boring safety lecture. Now, if only I were allowed to really cut loose, I could show all of you the pure genius of Mei Hatsune. As she said this last part, Mei threw her head back to let out an insane laugh. One that sent shivers down all the students. And while the girl continued to laugh, Vlad King cleared his throat with a little cough. By the looks of it, I take it that you finished what I asked you to? Asked the teacher. Hatsune stopped her laughing so fast that it nearly gave Izuku whiplash, and turned her head to look at the 1B homeroom teacher while giving him a thumbs up. Just about done, said the support course teen. Though I do want to go over some other improvements to make these babies a bit tougher to deal with. I can tell you all about it while you sign a permission form to allow me to use the support department's rocket fuel. No. As Vlad King said this, his face went flat as it lost all the humor it had, and was replaced with a more stony expression. If that bothered Hatsune, she didn't show it at all. All she did was jump off the back of the three-pointer robot, while still grinning like a mad woman. Vlad just shook his head, turning to look at his students. Well then, while Hatsune finishes her job, I want to go over how this exercise will work. One of you will. Vlad King got no further as the man's ringtone went off. Grumbling, he pulled his phone out while giving the device a nasty look. Yet that look quickly morphed into one of abject horror, so powerful that his phone nearly slipped out of his hands. After catching it, he looked up at his students who all stared at the man who was growing pale. I have to go, he said, already on the move. There has been an emergency on campus. All of you are to help Hatsune put everything away and then head back to class. Then, wait there till I return. That's final. And without another word, the man dashed off, quickly disappearing from sight. Once he was gone, Kendo quickly took the lead as she clapped her large hands together to get everyone's attention. Thankfully for the orange-haired girl, she received no pushback or outright refusal. They had all seen the look on the pro hero's face, recognizing that something serious had to have happened for him to act like that. The only one who proved difficult was the lone support student who spent the next 5 or so minutes fighting with Kendo, as she did not want to undo all the hard work she had done. Eventually, Itsuko wore the pink-haired mechanic down. As one, the students began to move through the faux city to where Hatsune had stored the robots that she had tinkered with. And while on the move, the class began to speculate on what could have happened. Pony thought that an accident might have occurred at the ASG, one that needed all heroes on deck. Yeah, agreed Tsuburaba as he let out a dark chuckle. How much you want to bet that blonde jerk caused it? I can just see him losing his cool before exploding on everyone. Hearing that caused most of the class to let out a nervous laugh. Given what they had seen of Bakugo's temper, it was a possibility. Not one they wanted to see happen, of course. As for Izuku, the teen just scratched the back of his head as he looked away. Then, in the middle of the street just ahead of them, came a swirling dark vortex made of mist. Instantly going on high alert, Kendo ordered her fellow classmates to hide. Everyone scattered at that, moving into the nearby buildings and down alleyways to take cover. As for Izuku, he along with Shishida, Pony, Mei, and Itsuka all made their way down into an alleyway. After a moment had passed, a lone figure walked out of the portal. It was a tall, lanky man with pale blue hair that was completely unkempt. Yet what drew everyone's attention were the multiple severed hands on his body, holding onto his arms and face. And there was something else about this person that put Izuku on edge. Just looking at him caused the hair on the back of his neck to rise. "This is such a drag," complained the handman, scratching his neck as he spoke. "Such a boring level to be on. I so wanted to be there when we defeated the final boss, not doing this side quest. If Kurogiri doesn't record the moment when Namu smashes that man's skull in, I'm going to have to kill him. Hopefully, the loot and reputation I gain from this will be worth it." As Izuku tried his best to process what the man meant, more figures appeared from within the portal. 3 of them, each with an exposed brain. The first of these monsters had huge bat-like wings and a gas mask covering its lower face. The second had 4 eyes along with thin, lengthy arms making it look a bit like a skinny gorilla. The final one was the most muscular of the 3, dark-skinned and eyeless, wearing tattered shorts. Staring at them, Izuku felt a cold sweat cover his body as he tried his best to swallow. Thankfully, he wasn't alone. Shishida's jaw had dropped, his hairy form shaking in terror at the sight. Itsuka's face could not hide the fear she felt while Pony stood there frozen in fear. "Sir Midoriya, Dobi, why aren't the alarms going off?" whispered Shishida. Izuku nearly jumped at the whisper so close to his ear, but he managed to keep himself still. He did not want to do anything that would catch the attention of those monsters. I don't know," admitted Midoriya, his mind trying to piece together a theory. Right now, he only had one. Maybe it has something to do with the press from yesterday? I heard that while we were in class with All Might they managed to get onto school grounds. Perhaps there were repairs needed after that, and the alarm was shut off. No, that's not it. Mei's voice was just barely above a whisper as she looked at the monsters herself, a hand on her chin. "Power Loader went over that system late into the night. I know because he kicked me out of the support studio before he left at 8. It's more likely that they bypassed the system thanks to that warp quirk they got." "That's a pretty serious flaw," Pony whispered. Izuku shook his head before glancing over at Pony. "Not really. Warp quirks are very rare, and each one works in a different way. I heard that in order to detect when one is being used, the security equipment needs to understand the frequency of the warper in order to detect how they are warping time and space." "That's right," exclaimed Mei as she slammed her open palm on Izuku's shoulder before giving him a thumbs up. "Looks like you're not just a bunch of muscles there." Meanwhile, back with the villains, the portal had closed, leaving the 4 standing in the middle of the street with their leader staring off into the distance toward the main campus. "Well, while the main boss Namu is destroying the symbol of peace, I get to destroy his precious society," spoke the person who was clearly a villain. His tone sounded like he was trying his best to convince himself that what he was doing was worth it. And by the way his voice rose, a smile forming beneath his disturbing mask, it was working. Oh, how their reputation will drop when the public learns that an entire school was slaughtered. As the lead villain began walking towards the exit, the shattering of glass filled the air. Everyone looked up to see Tetsu, his body hardened by steel, first raised as he shot downwards towards the villain. The teen had screamed something that Izuku didn't quite make out, but the intention was clear as day. Sadly, he never made contact as the eyeless monster grabbed Tetsu by the arm before slamming him down into the street, as though he were little more than a rag doll. Blood shot out of the steel user's mouth as he bounced off the ground. "No!" screamed Izuku as his wings activated, sending him flying towards the villains without ever really thinking about it. The hand villain seemed to stare at him, letting the green-haired youth touch the monster still holding his classmate to use Divine Divide upon it. As soon as he did, however, Izuku felt more power running through him than anything he had ever felt before. So much so that there was pain before his wings shattered into nothing. Falling to the ground, he looked up to see all 4 villains looking at him. "How nice," said the hand villain. Now that Izuku was closer, he could see the man's smile in all of its sickening glory. "The pathetic low-level scrubs are coming out to meet us. Good. Let's kill them all." The 4-eyed monster looked down at Izuku, its tongue hanging out slightly as it let out a primal cry. While the noise sent a cold wave pulsing through the green-haired teen, he did not back down. Tetsu," cried Izuku to his friend and classmate without taking his eyes from the threat in front of him. "Get out of here!" Gritting his teeth, Midoriya used the skills he had learned from the Kendo Dojo to leap upward from the ground and kick his target right in the lower jaw. As he fell back towards the ground, the young hero spun his body around rapidly before landing on his feet. The four-eyed thing then tried to reach out and grab him, only for Izuku to kick his hand away. Yet that was as far as he got as the dark, eyeless one backhanded the teen. Blood flew out of Izuku's mouth the moment contact was made, his ribs almost cracking from the blow. But before he could even process the full extent of the pain he was in, the Divine Divider found himself flying towards a wall of a nearby building at a dangerous speed. "Horn cannon," came Pony's voice. Then, before Izuku could become a mere splat against the wall, a pair of horns rocketed toward him. Attaching themselves at his waist, the horns turned to the side, narrowly avoiding the wall while slowing down the inertia. Now Izuku could see his friend and... "Pony!" yelled Izuku in a state of pure panic. "Behind you!" He watched as the blonde's eyes widened in confusion, not realizing that the bat-winged thing was now behind her. With hands raising above its brain-exposed head, it looked ready to deliver a crushing blow to the girl's skull. One that was stopped thanks to Shishida, who tackled the monster as his size began to increase. With his increased mass, the even more beast-like teen pinned the bat-winged thing down while delivering blow after blow right into its face. Yet, even from this distance, Izuku could see that each of Shishida's punches were doing little, if anything, to hurt that monster. Somehow, the bat creature was able to push Shishida off of him before grabbing him by the wrists and taking off. Thankfully, before it could get too far away, Itsuka had begun using the training from her mother's class to leap from wall to wall in the alleyway between the two buildings to get high into the air so that she was above her target. With an enlarged hand, she made a chopping motion right into the monster's back, while Pony launched more horns aimed at its wings. A cry of pain was finally heard as the two attacks hit at the same time, causing the thing to drop its prey. As for Shishida, he shrank before he hit the ground, while also curling himself into a ball in order to transfer his momentum. Glancing over where the other two creatures were, Izuku saw that his class was trying to deal with the intruders. Shiozaki had extended her vines out, wrapping them around the two things so tightly that the thorns should have been digging into their flesh. At the same time, Kamakiri, Rin, and Kaibara were striking at them close range with their quirks. Blades extended, Kamakiri seemed to leap between the two while sounding a little like Bakugo. However, he wasn't able to give them so much as a paper cut, and while Kaibara and Rin attacked with their own quirks, neither of their strikes even did so much as dent the things. Even Tetsu, who had stayed in the area, tried punching them to no avail. All the while, the hand villain just stood there scratching his cheek slightly. "Well, this is boring," commented the villain lazily. "Namu, you're all so high-leveled that these newbies can't even scratch you. Might as well be the main protagonist in one of those anime sword-something animes. Guess none of you will need a boost. Just kill them already." Before Izuku's mind could process what it had heard, the vines snapped as the two things now known as Namu let out mighty roars while their arms swung in the air. Everyone there was knocked back, skidding on the ground so hard that several of them left small trails of blood in their wake. Even the bat Namu joined in, grabbing Shishida and Pony before flinging them over with the rest, so that they could all be killed at once. As for Itsuka, she had taken matters into her own hands. After activating her quirk to enlarge both of her hands, the orange-haired girl began smashing and digging into the buildings and streets, ripping out large chunks. Beads of sweat appeared on her brow as she then began to punch into the rubble until they were smaller, regardless of the blood dripping from her hands. Then, "Yanagi, give us cover," yelled Kendo. Izuku watched in amazement as the silver-haired girl's quirk activated, levitating and moving around all the debris that Kendo had just made. It spirals around the area until it became something like a windstorm that nearly blinded everyone there. Squinting, Izuku could see the hand villain raising his hands to protect himself. Then, before he could give out an order to his minions, Itsuka appeared in front of him with her fist still enlarged. "Stay away from my classmates." With that workry uttered, Itsuka punched the hand man with all her might, sending him against the wall right behind him. One of the Namu then tried to swipe at her, only for the big fist user to dodge it with a leap back into the mass of debris. Then, after a moment or two, it ended, leaving the villain and his three Namu standing in the middle of the street alone. Slowly, the man stood on shaky legs and narrowed eyes filled with anger. His right hand began to twitch as if begging to be used. However, the villain ignored it as his eyes focused on where the UA students had been. "Namu," breathed the villain, pure hate dripping off his words. "Find them and kill them." Meanwhile, just what the heck were you thinking? The entirety of 1B flinched when they heard that. Kendo's voice echoing around the mock office building they were all currently hiding in. As many of the students there did the best they could to patch up their injuries, their eyes constantly shifted to the fuming orange-haired girl. She stood in one of the corners of the room with her arms crossed against her chest looking down at Tetsu. The steel quirk user was currently on his knees, head downcast. Sorry, began Tetsu before pausing to gulp loudly, as he looked up at the angry expression of Itsuka. Look, when I heard them talking about killing people, I just didn't. I thought I could take them down and… Itsuka let out a growl, gritting her teeth as she continued to stare at Tetsu, while giving off an angry big sister vibe. One that had nearly the entire class giving them space. All except for two who barely stepped forward with their hands up in a calming manner. Lady Kendo, please, said Shishida in a tone meant to bring a sense of calm. I'm sure it was never Sir Tetsu's intention to put anyone in harm's way. His actions were surely done with the goal of protecting the school. He's right, Itsuka, added Izuku. If he hadn't done that, those things would have just gone to the school to kill everyone. Kendo gave her friend a look that nearly caused him to take a step back. However, after a moment, her features softened somewhat. I know that, she admitted before glancing over at the steel quirk user. But it would have been smarter to try and sneak around to the school. They had no idea we were here. We could have easily told the teachers what just happened or warned the students. But now, we're stuck here. Hey, Hatsune. What are they doing now? The class turned to look over at Mei, who was standing by the window with a grin still on her face. From what Izuku knew, her quirk let her zoom in on things like a pair of binoculars. If this wasn't a life or death situation, he would be asking her so many questions. Heh, you guys made him mad, laughed the crazy support course student. Right now that handyman is stomping his foot like a kid throwing a temper tantrum, while the rest of them are just breaking stuff. Must be looking for us. That's when Takage stepped forward, her arms missing as well as an eye. Yeah, and they're going to be looking for a while, said the lizard tail splitter. I have a bunch of my pieces out there making noises to lead them away from us. Hopefully, we can distract them until a teacher comes looking for us. Excuse me, Lady Takage, began Shishida before clearing his throat. But I was just wondering what will happen if said teacher runs into those brutes. Setsuna didn't say anything out loud. Not like she needed to, as her face just seemed to scream the answer. A single teacher, even a former pro hero, might be able to handle one of those things. But all three? That might be a little much. And what if they tried to make a break for it, and those monsters chased after them into the school? Fear began to settle on the entire class. Izuku could see it all, even in Itsuka's face. He was scared too. The teen tried to calm himself, using Mr. Kendo's words to try and solve this problem, so that they could all get out of this situation alive. But no matter what he tried, he just couldn't figure it out. He wasn't strong enough to use divine dividing on these monsters, not without his wings breaking due to the strain and falling on his ass again. Even if he did try to sap the strength of the same one he had divided before, and it succeeded, that still left two that were pretty tough. Much stronger than any of his normal kicks could take care of. The only option he could see having even a chance at succeeding was to fly towards the school and find a teacher. But the odds that the Namu, as the villain called them, spotting him were too great. If they did, they would surely follow him to the school and just begin the rampage they had planned on. At least like this, they could keep the damage to a minimum. At least for a while. In the end, there was simply nothing he could. Suddenly, the young hero's eyes widened as he turned to look at his classmates. Mr. Kendo was right. He had all the tools he needed. He just needed to figure it out. But he had also told the teen that his greatest obstacle was himself. The problem was that he was only thinking about what he could do by himself. Hadn't he written down his entire class's quirks? Wasn't he aware of all the skills they brought to the table? And what about the area? Couldn't he make use of it? Bits and pieces of information began to swirl around in the green-haired teen's mind, slowly becoming puzzle pieces that came together. Even faster when he glanced around the room, reminding himself of his allies and their abilities. Slowly, he began to come to the conclusion that his plan could work. But, can I do my part in this plan? Thought Izuku as he bit his lower lip hard enough to draw blood. When I used divine dividing on that Namu, it was so strong that my wings shattered. If it does that again, not only will I be killed, but so will everyone else. Wait, the wings only shatter when the strain of too much excess energy becomes too great. So if I have a way to release that energy, I wasn't going at my full speed, so if I can shift that energy to that, then maybe. Izuku's eyes widened, as he then turned to look at his classmates. only to realize that they were already staring at him. No doubt he had been muttering everything, and had weirded them out. So the teen just gave a nervous laugh. "I think I have an idea," he said aloud at last. "I won't pretend that it's perfect, but it might just stop those things. But it's going to take all of us to do it." There was a brief moment of hesitation before the class gave Izuku their full attention. Since nobody else had any ideas, they were willing to at least hear him out. Seeing this, Midoriya nodded before turning to Mei. "Hatsune, can you make the robots here extra dangerous?" he asked. "Like just go wild and make them a serious threat." The support student looked at him as if Christmas had come early, a bit of drool escaping her lips. But she quickly wiped it away before pulling out a wrench, which then twirled in her hand. "Give me 5 minutes, and I'll see what I can do," she said before laughing, sending shivers down the spines of all the students. X. "Where are they?" roared Shigaraki as he stomped his foot on the ground, his childish whining echoing down the streets while being carried off by the wind. In his mind, he knew what he should do. Just walk through the gates at the other end of this area to enter the school, and then have his Namu slaughter everyone. Maybe even capture it on video for the public to watch. But if he did that, then those brats might get away. Including that stupid NPC that punched him. The nerve of her. What had he done to deserve that? Before Shigaraki could answer his own question, sound of one of his Namu, crying out in pain, caught his attention. Turning, he glanced over at the four-eyed one, seeing its hands covering its eyes as it thrashed about. And above its head were 4 floating fingers. Stupidly, the villain blinked at that before he was caught off guard again by the sounds of dozens of windows breaking. As glass rained down on the streets, the leader of the League of Villains looked up to see a number of green machines with twin tails, using one of the metal legs to clear all the shards out of the window frame. Before he could even guess how many there were, he spotted several robots with the number 1 painted on them racing towards them. "Divide," came a voice that was annoyingly familiar to Shigaraki. Before he could turn around, he saw a flash of light burst past him. Just briefly, he was able to make out the kid in green before the noob rocketed down the street past the army of machines and out of sight. That's when the streets became a war zone. From the windows, rubber bullets rained down upon them from all directions. Both ground Namu let out cries of pain as they were struck, protecting their master on instinct, shielding him from the shots that struck with so much force that they embedded themselves into the pavement. As for the winged Namu, it tried to fly up higher in an attempt to drive down and launch a counterattack. But as soon as it was up there, more of the tailed robots revealed themselves to be on the roof. They fired their projectiles at the winged one, forcing it back. But what was most shocking to the villain was how the eyeless Namu was reacting. It trashed around more than the other two, and showed signs that it was in far more pain than either of the other two Namu. A sight that shocked the Shigaraki, as this one was supposed to be the closest in power to the one that was killing All Might right now. By this point, the robots with the number 1 painted on them had closed the distance to begin their attack. The black Namu swung at them, but his attack was slower than before, and lacked the same amount of force that it had when it sent that green-haired noob flying. Because of this, the machines were able to dodge the swipe before surrounding the Namu, wrapping their metal arms around its body. Wait, shouldn't that have been easier for it to? Shigaraki's thoughts were cut off as the robots exploded. The villain's ears began ringing in pain as he was flung backward, thankfully caught by the other two Namu, who were now trying to get their master out of the shower of bullets. Shigaraki let them, ignoring everything around him as he focused on his black bioweapon. There the eyeless brute stood there as he continued to be pelted, smoldering embers marking the outlines of the areas of missing skin. As the villain tried to process this, he was suddenly dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes when the Namu spotted a couple of those brats down the street. They chased after them, leaving Shigaraki alone. At the same time, in an undisclosed location, Mei Hatsune was grinning like a mad woman as she continued her work. Her movements were like a blur as she went from robot to robot, opening up various panels to supercharge everything she could. Their speed, accuracy, removing all the safety limiters, and doing a few other things that might get her expelled from UA had the situation not been so dire. "Fly, my babies, fly," she cried out with insane laughter. "Make your mama proud." While this was going on, Tetsu stood behind her, standing guard in case the villains figured out where the machines were coming from, to fight them, giving Mei time to escape should it come to that. But all he could do was stand there in awe at her work, heart thumping harder. Elsewhere, Pony and Kodai were racing down a route given to them by Mei. The pair went down dark corridors and flights of steps, going deeper and deeper underground. On occasion, they would pass by a robot that would wave its slender arms in the air, as it told them that they shouldn't be there. But neither girl listened as they continued forward to complete their part of the plan. Eventually, the two came upon a large steel door. Not bothering to stop, Pony began to fire her horn cannon. The American girl didn't care if she got in trouble for damaging school property or anything like that. Her friend, one of the first she made when coming to this country, had given her an important task. With everyone risking their lives, how could Pony live with herself if she didn't do her part? If she didn't give it her all? Luckily, her horns were stronger than the door, shredding it into nothing in a matter of moments before kicking its remains down. When the pair crossed the threshold, they found themselves standing on a steel catwalk with the head of the 0-point robot looking right at them. Back with Izuku, the teen gritted his teeth as he sped around the faux city at an alarming speed. Up and down the streets he went, burning through all the stolen strength he had before rounding up from behind each of Namu to steal more from them, having their strength again and again. But despite everything he was doing, there was a great deal of pain. The first time he had divided their strength, the strain had been almost too much to bear despite all he was doing. He felt like he was being torn apart as tears swelled up in his eyes. And while the other passes after those first ones were easier to bear, the pain he felt still lingered. But it would all be worth it if his entire class made it out of this alive. Izuku had managed to spot them all luring the ground Namu, keeping them on the move. Itsuka jumped and dodged out of the way of the creatures chasing her, while Manga used his quirk to zap them with lightning or blow them away with an explosion. Rin pelted them with scales that were now sticking into their flesh, while Shota used his twin impact to deliver remote blows to them after striking them once. And when the Namu flung whatever they could at the ground troop, Tsuburaba would come to the rescue by creating a solid air barrier to block it. Meanwhile, the winged Namu had begun doing its best to chase after Izuku. Trying being the keep word, as even before Izuku had used divine dividing on it, he was the faster of the two by far. Now, after 3 uses, the Namu looked like it was having trouble just staying airborne. With this villain weakened, Izuku began to take the offensive as he continued his part of the plan. He would zoom forward, leaving that thing in his metaphorical dust before circling around to strike at it from behind. A kick to the head, heel to shoulder, and a jab to its side. Over and over again, Izuku delivered blow after blow in between, stealing more of their strength. Then, as he made another pass, he saw them, Pony and Kodai. The pair were high in the air in the middle of the false city, the American girl standing on her horns to keep her in the air, while holding her classmate bridal style. As for Kodai, she was carrying something in her arms tightly. A grin appeared on Izuku's face as he looked down to see that the others were in place. The 1, 2, and 3-pointer robots had helped the class herd the 2 Namu below to this position. Both of them didn't look so good now, bruises and burns covering their bodies from all the attacks they had received. They were also slower now, as they looked like it was nothing short of sheer willpower that was allowing them to drag their bodies toward their targets. As for their leader, he too was following them into the middle of an intersection. Better make sure the gang is all together, thought Izuku as he prepared for his first ultimate move. One he had been thinking about since he had gotten his wings. He shot up high into the air, far above the bat-winged Namu. Once he was high enough, the teen shot down feet first while spinning around. Heavenly Dragon Fang. As he said this, Izuku's feet connected with the Namu's back, sending it hurtling toward the ground. The teen almost joined it as he quickly discovered the drawback to this move. It made him really dizzy. Thankfully, he was able to right himself before crashing, doing his best to correct his vision as he watched the end result of their planning as it came to fruition. Honoki was the first to act, softening the ground so much that it became like quicksand for the 3 monsters. Once they had sunk all the way down to their hip, the lipless teen stopped applying his quirk before a waste went in. With a grin, the bandana-wearing boy welded their bodies to the ground at the atomic level, while Shiozaki sent out her vines to bind their bodies further. Once the welder had finished, Bondo began covering the entire area with his glue as the cherry on top. Once that was done, every student on the ground made a mad dash as Kodai dropped what she was carrying. At first, it looked like a small robot action figure. That is, until she brought her hands together to deactivate her quirk. In an instant, the object returned to its original size, making its identity known to all. The massive 0-pointer. All of the Namu looked up at their impending doom along with the hand villain, who had managed to leap over to the black creature. As if he thought he could pry it out from the trap, it was now in. "Wait," said the villain, eyes wide with shock. "Is that a giant robot? How can this school afford that?" Smash. The 0-pointer struck the ground, sending a massive shockwave along with a massive cloud of dust racing down every street. Buildings around it shook with so much force that those closest to it began to crumble or simply toppled over, the debris landing on the robot. The street now had massive cracks spiderwebbing their way through the area, causing the fire hydrants to erupt with water. Slowly, Class 1B approached the robot while silence filled the air. Even May watched from a window to check and see if the nightmare was finally over. Then, "Boost," came the voice of the villain. "Transfer." Izuku, who was still in the air looking down at the carnage, widened his eyes when he heard that, and even more so when a black fist erupted from the zero-pointer shell. Another hand joined it, together slowly pulling apart the metal to make a wider opening. The Namu then staggered out, parts of its body missing as it bled out. It only managed to take 3 or 4 steps before it fell on the ground, never to rise again. Yet what Izuku saw next shook him to his core. The hand villain had jumped out of the hole with a new addition to his costume. A red gauntlet with a green gem embedded on the back of the wrist covered the man's right hand. "I see," came Albion's voice, though this time it wasn't in Izuku's head. "So you are here, DarthValgaav." Izuku blinked as he lifted his left hand, finding Albion's gem had appeared again. "Albion, it is you," came a new voice. Izuku noticed that the green gem on the villain's gauntlet began to glow when the voice spoke. Now the villain lifted his hand in annoyance. "You know this scrub?" asked the villain as he held up his hand in annoyance, looking between the metallic surface and the flying teen. "Indeed, we know each other well, mortal," answered Albion. "After all, we are both the great dragons whose souls were used to create the sacred gears. And once more we have found each other to continue our—" "Albion, please help me," wailed the one Izuku had to assume was DarthValgaav. It almost sounded like he was crying. "This human host is horrible. He uses me to scratch himself, and he's just so annoying. I miss Issei." "Would you shut your whining?" snapped the villain. "And who is this scrub?" DarthValgaav let out a sigh that made Izuku feel like he had done this more than once. At the same time, the Divine Divider began to glance around to see where the rest of his classmates were. They were still around. However, they were tense while keeping their eyes glued on Izuku. No doubt they had seen the way he was hovering in the air, seeing this as well as his expression that told them that this wasn't over. Thankfully, no of them, not even Pony, Kodai, and May, were close enough to hear what was going on. "I told you before of the other heavenly dragon," DarthValgaav said finally, clearly annoyed. "The one that is my opposite. While I double the strength of my user and can transfer that strength to others, Albion's power allows him to cut his opponent's power in half." "What?" whined the hand villain. "That's not fair. You never told me there was another person with cheat code powers. I was supposed to be the only one, me." "I did tell you, Shigaraki," began DarthValgaav. "Many times, in fact." The man-child then began to scratch his neck violently, over and over again. Izuku flew back a little, unnerved by the strange behavior. Then, just when it looked like he might claw out his own neck, the boosted gear user slammed his palm on the zero-pointer. What happened next scared Izuku as the machine that had given him so much trouble turned to dust with the pale man standing in the middle of it. "Guess I'll have to do some experience farming for a," began Shigaraki until he was interrupted as a black liquid shot out of his mouth. He flailed about calling out to someone he called master before the black substance completely covered him. And then, he was gone. With the villain having retreated and the danger past, Class 1B wasted little time on dealing with the aftermath the best they knew how. Kendo had gone into the main building in order to contact the teachers. While she was gone, Izuku stayed with the rest of the class within the training area. The Divine Divider had them rope off the area with whatever material they had, which was mostly Shiozaki's hair, making sure that the bodies of the Namu remained untouched. As for May, the support student just began to tinker with this and that, almost like she was off in her own little world. Much to their relief, Vlad King wasted little time in returning back to the school. His face was almost as white as his hair when he had arrived, only to grow paler when he saw the Namu. "There was one of those things at the USG along with a large number of villains," he said, eyes fixed on the open-skulled corpse before him. "Before we even got there, that thing nearly killed Aizawa and gave All Might the hardest fight he's had in a while. All that while your classmates were terrorized by the small fries. To think they would have more of those things. Truly, God was watching over not only us, but the rest of the school." "We should give thanks," said Ibara as she clasped her hands together in pores. She said this. A light seemed to shine down on Ibara from above. Seeing how they were still out in the open with no spotlights above them, this naturally caught everyone's attention. "Okay, please tell me you're all seeing what I'm seeing," yelled Awais as he began to search the sky. First Midoriya pulls out notebooks from out of nowhere, and now this. "What the goddamn?" The teen wisely cut himself off from finishing that sentence as the vine-haired girl gave him a death glare, tendrils of her hair rising up like snakes ready to strike. At the same time, Albion began to chuckle to himself. I wonder what would happen if she were to learn the truth, thought an amused Albion within Izuku's head. Thankfully, before anything could escalate any further, Vlad King coughed into his fist to grab everyone's attention. I just want to let all of you know how proud I am of all of you, said the blood-themed hero, color slowly returning to his face. Like Shiozaki said, you not only protected yourselves against a true threat, but also saved the lives of many of the students here at UA, all without anyone getting seriously hurt. Why, you even managed to protect a civilian while you were at it. I'll make sure to bring this up with Nezu to make sure you all receive some extra credit. Now, we were going to be picking class reps after today's lesson, but with everything that has happened, I think. Sir Vlad, interrupted Shishida as he raised a furry hand. Please forgive my interruption. Yet I feel I must express the feelings of not only myself, but the entire class when I say that we are ready to pick out class reps. With that, Shishida, as well as the rest of the class, turned to look at Itsuka and Izuku as one. At first, Midoriya just looked behind him to see if there was someone standing behind him. But no, there was nobody there. Then it dawned on him that they were, indeed, suggesting that he and Itsuka become the class reps. As for Kendo, her face was scarlet as she waved her hands around. Wait, she said. Hold on a second, why us? Pony bounced a little as she moved towards the pair with wide eyes and an even wider smile. Because both of you were so cool, exclaimed Pony as she bounced towards the pair with wide eyes that seemed to sparkle. While most of the class nodded in agreement, the horned girl continued. Itsuka, you managed to come up with that plan to get us away from the villains that first time. Plus, you punched that guy while telling him to stay away from us. It was like having a cool big sis. And Izuku, he was the first to leap out to help Tetsu. Not to mention his own plan. Big protective brother right there. Well, I just didn't want to, stammered Izuku as he felt the heat rising towards his cheeks, trying to brush aside what Pony was saying. But it was no use. For some reason, it was hard to argue with the American girl as she stood there smiling brightly at them. Even more so when she took both their hands in her own, jumping up and down excitedly as the rest of the class just commented that she had a point. Within the next couple of minutes, Izuku became the new vice rep of Class 1B. Honestly, he was pretty happy with the decision of his class. While it was embarrassing to hear them all thinking that he was more likely the smarter of the pair and had a stronger quirk, they all agreed that Kendo would be a better fit for class rep. Mainly due to the fact that she was the more confident one, and they could all see Izuku turning to her for advice. Yeah, he could see that too. Once that was done, Ken told everyone to head over to the nurse's office to get checked up before heading home. As his first duty as vice rep, Izuku helped Kendo decide who should be at the front of the line before hanging out in the back. After all, it was their duty to make sure that everyone else was taken care of, so he would be last. And, as he waited alongside Itsuka in a silence that was mostly comfortable, he noticed that many of the guys leaving the nurse's office were red-cheeked and walking as if in a daze. Ibara, on the other hand, left the room with sparkles in her eyes while her hands remained clasped together in prayer. Then, finally, it was his turn. After closing the door behind him, Izuku saw a lone figure in the room. Someone who wasn't Recovery Girl. It was a young woman who looked like she was in her early 20s or so, with long blonde hair and dressed like a nun. It wasn't until she looked up from her device, smiling at him warmly, that he finally recognized her. This was the Twilight Saint, a hero whose healing quirk had already saved the lives of countless people. Was she to be the school's new nurse? Hello there, White Dragon Emperor, said the pro-hero kindly. And just like that, Izuku's blood turned to ice. He stared at the woman who just kept standing there with a warm and friendly smile, as his own features were that of horror. Did she know about Albion? If that was true, then she knew that he didn't have a quirk, that she had been lying to everyone. Was she going to tell Vlad King? Would she tell his entire class, the newspapers, Forgive my partner, he's a little shocked, came Albion's voice in the real world, the blue gem appearing on Izuku's left hand as it did so. It is a pleasure to see you again, Lady Asia Hyodu. Though I wish the circumstances were different. The nurse let out a light giggle before her smile dimmed slightly, becoming just a tiny bit sad. I wish the same thing, Albion, she said. Izuku blinked in confusion as he looked between the gem on his left hand and the school's new nurse. Wait, said the teen finally. Do you two know each other? Yes, said Asai as she looked from the teen standing before to the gem on the back of his hand. Though it was a long time ago when we last saw each other. Indeed, agreed Albion, using the tone that Izuku had come to associate with him, nodding. The woman standing before you now was one of the many wives of the former Red Dragon Emperor, Issei Hyodu. He fought with my previous partner Vali Lucifer. Oh, I guess that wait, wives? Yelled Izuku, eyes bulging as he stared at the woman before him. Oh yes, replied Issei with a blush, a hand reaching up to cup a cheek, while a dreamy look appeared in her eyes. I married my Issei along with many other girls who became like my sisters. Yes, there has been no greater perverted wielder of the booster gear than Hyodu, added Albion, this time using a tone that told Izuku that he was nodding in a more sagely fashion. In fact, his love of women's breasts became so well known that he was often referred to as the Breast Dragon Emperor and the Grabbin' Dragon. He even had this special on television once where he sang a children's song about grabbing women's breasts, added Issei in a cheerful tone that caused Izuku's jaw to hit the floor. Oh, not to mention this little stage play we did. Izuku could only stand there, steam pouring out of his ears as he took all this in. It was so hard to process, not helped by the fact that the woman before him was telling him all this, while having an almost angelic smile on her face. Then, wait, if that villain had the booster gear, doesn't that mean that your husband, began Izuku, suddenly realizing a horrible truth for this woman, is dead, finished Issei, her smile vanishing as she nodded. Yes, my Issei died nearly 200 years ago before the age of quirks began. As she spoke, Asia lowered her head in mourning. At the same time, Izuku's looked like his mind was going to fry at any moment. Did she say 200 years ago? How was that possible? I'm sorry, but that's a little hard to believe, admitted Izuku. I mean, you look like you could easily pass for one of my upperclassmen or a young hero just starting out. Plus, if you were born in the time before quirks, how would you be able to heal others? At that, an almost devilish smile appeared on Asia's face. The same way you are able to steal other people's strength, a sacred gear. As she said this, rings appeared on her hands. Mine is called Twilight Healing, granting me the ability to heal. As for how I look this way, well, suddenly, bat-like wings sprung out from Asia's back. Wings that clashed greatly with her outfit. Wings that brought images of I sort of got myself into a bit of trouble and was reincarnated as a devil. The only sound to come out of Izuku was a small squeak as his vision began to spin. The teen raised both his arms up as if ready to push the woman away if need be, hearing her giggle in a cute manner that did not sit well with him. After all, who in their right mind would not be freaked out by all of this? Weren't devils supposed to steal people's souls? The fact that she was making that noise sent alarm bells ringing in his head. So, gritting his teeth, he prepared himself for whatever trickery this woman might try. Relax, partner, she means you no ill will, said Albion in an attempt to calm down Izuku's mental freakout. Out of all of the former Red Dragon Emperor's harem, she was the kindest of them all. You shall never find a more gentle soul. Really? Asked Izuku cautiously. Yes, replied Albion, though I am surprised to see her here at this time. Tell me, Lady Asia, are you here now because you sense the awakenings of both dragons? Are you here to witness our battle once more? Or are you hoping to save D-Drag from that villain? The Twilight Healer shook her head, her long golden hair flowing as she did so. Regrettably, I didn't know that either of you had returned until this afternoon, she admitted. I took this job in exchange for a favor from the school. The fact that we are all here at the same time is simply a coincidence. A favor? Asked Izuku with piqued interest. Yes, said Issei, her face becoming serious yet somewhat relieved. You see, the granddaughter of one of my dearest friends, Gasper, got into some messy trouble recently. Since her parents are, not willing to help her, the rest of us reached out to find some way of helping her that didn't involve turning her into a devil. Saving that as a last resort. Thankfully, Yua was kind enough to offer a hand in exchange for various services. Izuku blinked at that, wondering just what kind of person Asia was talking about. Hello everyone. I'm Himiko Toga, and I'm a wanted criminal. The sight of a blonde girl, her hair in messy buns, greeted the class with a slightly unnerving smile that showed off her fangs. It was not something that Izuku or anyone in 1B would have expected to see after the couple of days off they had after the attack on both the Uschi and Yua itself. And with that rather, bold declaration, they were all at a loss on how to respond. Thankfully, Vlad King had no such issue as he walked over to her, before lightly swatting her head with a notebook. The girl reacted as though he had landed a much more powerful blow to her skull, rubbing her hair while backing away from the taller man. Then, the blood-themed hero turned to look at his students. Yes, began Vlad in a serious tone. As Miss Toga said, she is a criminal. However, Yua has recently started up a new program to help certain troubled youths with extenuating circumstances. So, Miss Toga here was given a choice. Either take her chances in court, or become a student here and become a hero to make amends for her crime. I think it's clear which option she picked. At that, the sound of palms being slammed on a desk echoed across the room as a waist stood up. Whoa, hold on there, the teen yelled with fury in his eyes. How is this fair? We all worked our butts off to get into Yua, and all she needed to do was commit a crime with a sob story waiting in the wings. He's right. This isn't right, yelled Tetsu as he threw a fist into the air. Seeing the reaction of some of his more vocal students, as well as the looks of many of the others who silently agreed with them, Vlad King held up his hands. Okay, I understand where you are all coming from, began the pro-hero. However, not everything is cut and dry. This is something that you will all have to learn in order to become proper heroes. Take Miss Toga here as an example. While she did commit a rather heinous crime, this was due to the fact that she had never received the proper quirk counseling. Instead, by her parents' own admission, she was taught quirk suppression. And, as I hope you are all beginning to guess, when she was no longer able to do so, it led to some disastrous results. At that, the class became quiet as Toga began looking around as if confused. Everyone there, including Izuku, knew that quirks got more powerful with every generation, as did certain tendencies and behaviors that were associated with those quirks. That was part of the reason counseling was so important, so that people were not at the mercy of their quirks. That, as well as making sure all that power didn't go to your head. The reason Miss Toga is in this class is because we both share blood-related quirks, continued Vlad once he saw he had everyone's attention. Both myself and Hound Dog shall be working with her every day in order to help her live a more functional life with her quirk. As for her placement here, yes, she will be taking all the same coursework as the rest of you to become a pro hero one day. That said, she chose this course knowing full well the cost of failure. If she falls behind in her grades, or does anything that will get her kicked out of the hero course, her expulsion and return to prison are all but assured. For a moment, silence overtook the room before Ibara clasped her hands together in prayer. We were quick to judge, began the Christian girl. Yes, Toga has sinned, but she is seeking a path to redemption. O Lord, we give you thanks for this opportunity to do your will. Everyone there stared at the vine-haired Christian as light shined down upon her. Albion let out a small chuckle within Izuku's mind, the green-haired teen believing he heard his partner muttering again about telling her something. As for Toga, she began to wildly rub her eyes in disbelief. Where is that light coming from? Asked the messy bun-haired girl. Thank you, cried Awais, who was now seated, throwing up his hands as he spoke. We've been wondering the same thing. Vlad Kind then cleared his throat again to get everyone's attention. Now that we've got that out of the way, does anyone have any questions? Midoriya? Izuku, who had been the first to raise his hand, quickly produced his notebook from seemingly out of nowhere before turning to a blank page. Yes, began the Divine Divider as he picked up a mechanical pencil. Toga. Vlad King said that you have a blood-related quirk. Could you tell us more about it? At that, Toga's smile fell a little. Before answering, she looked to her new homeroom teacher, as if asking for permission, which he granted with a nod. Once she saw this, the girl raised her hands up before pointing at her mouth. Okay, she began in a cheerful tone. My quirk allows me to transform into people whose blood I drank. Not only do I take on their appearance, but also their voice. Oh, I also get the clothing they were wearing, somehow. But every time that happens, it appears on top of whatever I'm wearing at the time, so it's better if I'm naked before transforming. Toga then slowly lowered her hands, feeling the gazes of the shocked class upon her. No doubt they were creeped out by what they had just heard. Who in their right mind wouldn't be after hearing? That's amazing, cried Midoriya. Unable to control himself, Izuku moved from his seat so that he was right in front of Himiko. Said girl was a little startled by this, jumping back a bit as her new green-haired classmate looked at her with wide eyes that seemed to sparkle with excitement. Your quirk is just so amazing. You could become one of the greatest spy heroes of all time. All you would need is a little blood, and you could slip into the villain's ranks without anyone noticing. You could be in and out, collecting all the information that the heroes would need before storming in. And that's not even considering all the non-heroic work you could do once you get your license. You could become the world's best understudy, taking on the form of any actor or actress perfectly. Heck, they wouldn't even need to fit you for a spare costume. Voice acting work, modeling, maybe some medical applications, and As Izuku continued to talk, he missed the widening eyes of the blood drinker, as well as the blush that was tinting her cheeks, while also becoming unable to close her mouth. As he went on and on, that blush moved to cover her entire cheeks until steam was coming out of her ears. Soon, her eyes became beating hearts as this random green-haired boy just continued to gush about her quirk, seeing a part of herself as amazing that the rest of the world just backed away from in disgust. Eventually, this ended when a frowning, red-faced Kendo stood up from her seat and silently walked behind Izuku. While giving Toga a look that said sorry about this, she then placed 2 hands on the back of her friend to begin pushing the still rambling Izuku back to his seat. As for the rest of the class, while most of them still harbored some concerns as to what she had done, the majority decided to give her a shot. After all, if the vice rep of the class didn't have an issue with her, then they didn't see why they should either. Once that was done, Vlad King informed them of the upcoming sports festival. After that, the school became a lot more interesting for the students of 1B as they began to prepare for the upcoming event. For one thing, their class was getting a bit more attention from the rest of the school, as many of them wanted to know more about the Namu attack. This caused a good deal of embarrassment in the class, especially with Izuku, but they did their best to answer people's questions as best they could. After all, when they became pros, they would be answering questions from civilians and reporters all the time, so it would be good practice. In contrast, their sister class responded to the same curiosity in a less than humble demeanor. Bakugo just told people to get out of his way, that he didn't have time to talk to worthless extras like them. Then another blonde from 1A just began to brag about how superior their class was, while a small child with purple balls on his head made innuendos at all the girls. And then there were people like Todoroki, son of the number 2 hero, who just walked past everyone without giving people a second glance. So it was understandable that most of the school began to dislike 1A, thinking they were elitists. As for classes, nearly every hero lesson where All Might wasn't involved became free quirk training. Everyone in 1B was giving it, they're all including Himiko, who had asked to train with Izuku, Itsuka, and Pony. She impressed everyone there with her agility and surprise tactics, even going toe-to-toe with Kendo using the wooden tantos that the school provided. What's more, Toga began to show Pony how to use her horns like blades for stabbing and cutting in order to make the horned girl a greater threat. Though for reasons he didn't know, Toga usually had a blush whenever they sparred. One day, a week before the sports festival, Izuku was walking past the various gyms the school had while being deep in thought. Since meeting the new nurse, Izuku had been full of questions on so many things that whenever he tried to get his thoughts down on paper, he ended up going through an entire notebook. And today, Asia had told him of the previous Red Dragon Emperor had died. Like me, Issei had been reincarnated as a devil, the nun had said. While he should have had a much longer lifespan, in order to gain more strength, he did things that shortened his lifespan. So please, Midoriya, do your best not to do the same. If you do, you will only end up hurting the many people you leave behind. Those words refused to leave Izuku's mind, almost on an infinite loop. Before Albion showed up, he really only had his mother. She had been the only one to worry about him regularly. Now he had the Kendos, Pony, Vlad King, Toga, his entire class, and so many more people in his life. He'd do anything to protect them, but he didn't want to make them sad. The answer to that is easy, partner, said Albion within the teen's head. Become as strong as you can while here at this school. That way you won't have to do such risky things later on, when other people's lives are on the line. That's easier said than done, muttered Izuku. What if more of those Namu show up and I'm... Izuku's words were cut off, as he heard a thud followed by a curse coming from one of the gyms. Thankfully done in a voice he didn't recognize. Curious, the Divine Divider glanced inside to see someone he vaguely remembered walking down the halls. It was a boy around his age, with purple hair that seemed to stand up despite the amount of sweat running down his forehead, as well as eyes that looked like he suffered from a lack of sleep. Midoriya watched as the teen got onto shaky legs, his breath coming out in heavy pants, before he began to punch the air in front of him with all his might. After a moment, "Need some help?" offered Izuku as he entered the gym. The purple-haired teen jumped at the words before spinning around to look at Izuku, who just walked in while scratching the back of his head. "And no," replied the other teen, clearly embarrassed at being seen like this. "I don't need your help." Izuku just smiled at this as he continued to make his way toward the sweating teen. Without missing a beat, he began to explain a better way to throw a punch, while also giving him a visual demonstration. Something that his new friend watched in awe, even trying it out himself and gasping at how different it felt. "Why are you helping me?" he asked once he had gone through the motions. "I'm not in your class." "Heck, I'm not even in the hero course. I'm aiming to take one of your slots. So why? Because you just looked like you needed it, replied Izuku, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Which, to the Divine Divider, it was. From there, the two exchanged backstories as they trained for the next hour or so. The teen, Hitoshi Shinso, spoke about how everyone thought he'd end up a villain with a quirk-like brainwashing. At that, Izuku couldn't help but to relate how people saw him before his quirk finally revealed itself. Something that shocked Shinso. But what united the teens was that despite what they had gone through their entire lives was a single goal: to be a hero. After all, you can't help what the heart longs for. Within the nurse's office of UA, Asia sat at her desk with her seat turned so that the warm reddish and golden rays of the setting sun offered the last of their warmth to her back. The room was silent save for the soft, tuneless humming that escaped her and the soft tapping upon the tablet in her hands as she scrolled down on it. As far as she could tell, everything was set for the sports festival. The school, naturally, had a medical room on site full of all the equipment she would need to treat any injury ranging from headaches to minor cuts and bruises to anything requiring major surgery. The only thing that still needed to be done was to deliver certain supplies that needed to be refrigerated the night before, as well as some other items that expired quickly. Absent-mindedly, the devilish nun briefly turned her attention to the desk, where a neat pile of medical charts belonging to a few students lay undisturbed. Students who, for one reason or another, seemed to find themselves in her office more often than some others with sticky notes attached to each one. While most people thought that the UA nurse's job was simply to heal their students, which it was, there was another key part to it: recommending the removal of certain students from the hero program when their health and well-being became an issue. Looking at the pile brought a frown to the seemingly young woman's face, for it broke her heart to do something like it. After all, UA was a place where the young heroes in training could work to improve their quirks and gain better control of them in order to save others. Getting hurt was expected, and with a quirk like her own, Asia could heal any injury, while Recovery Girl had certainly done her fair share of miracles. But, at the same time, Asia knew this was something that had to be done. Principal Nezu was the type who would allow any student entrance into the school as long as they passed, regardless of any negative effects their quirks might have. Something that hit a nerve with a certain sleep-deprived teacher. However, that did not mean that they were free to endlessly endanger themselves, either by their quirks or simply recklessly endangering themselves under the belief that they would be healed no matter what. After all, what would happen once these students left UA and no longer had the benefit of their healing talents? As such, it was now Asia's duty, as it had been Recovery Girl's before her, to observe the students that came into the nurse's office. How often they came in with the same injuries? If their quirk was causing serious problems. If they acted like their injuries were no big deal, something to be brushed off. A file belonging to one such student sat at the top of the pile on her desk. This student was a first year belonging to Class 1A whose quirk had a strange backlash that damaged their body when used multiple times. What was strange was that, before coming to this school, this student never showed any signs of this side effort or the super strength displayed. Thankfully, the drug test she had insisted on giving that student when she had started her first day looking for trigger and other similar quirk performance-enhancing drugs had come back negative. Also, the student had voiced their irritation over their constant need to be healed so often and seemed focused on improving. Because of these factors, this student wouldn't be dismissed after the sports festival. At least, not from her end. Still, while she was completely willing to help heal this student completely, as they tried their best to master this new aspect of the quirk, she could only do so much for so long. Okay, Twilight Healing would always heal the wounds as good as new. But what would happen when she wasn't there? Internships were right around the corner and Asia wouldn't be able to drop everything just to go and heal them. She was also worried about what would happen to this student once they left school. So while she commended this student for all the work they were putting into mastering their quirk, sooner or later her job would require her to make a difficult call. She was scheduled to meet with Nezu at the end of every month, going over her observations and suggestions on each of the students. While she wanted with all her heart to give them all the time in the world, she knew that for regular humans that simply wasn't possible. If this student didn't figure something out by the middle of the year, she would suggest their transfer to a different course. Yes, it would hurt them, but Asia would rather they start looking into different career paths than continue on this one sooner rather than later. Then, if she had to make the same recommendation for the same student at the end of the year, well, she would be raising a little hell of her own to make sure it happened. Then, just as she was turning her attention back to her tablet, the door to the nurse's office opened so suddenly, and with so much force, that it made the nun nurse jump out of her seat with a squeak. Looking up, Her eyes widened at a very odd sight. Standing in the doorway was Izuku Midoriya dressed in his gym uniform. The green-haired teen was panting heavily while carrying Toga in his arms. The younger blonde was passed out, face red with blood dripping from her face and onto the floor. "What in the," began Asia, but was cut off as Izuku zoomed into the room, looking ready to cry. "I'm so sorry," he began in clear panic, setting his new vampiric classmate on one of the beds. "We were just," and then she just, quickly moving across the room. Asia went over to the teen who was looking between her and Himiko so rapidly, she was surprised he wasn't getting dizzy. Sweat was dripping down his forehead as he spoke between his panting. "Midoriya, calm down," said Asia gently. She waited a moment, gesturing for him to get some water from a nearby pitcher of water on a nightstand. As he did so with shaky hands, Asia moved to check the girl's pulse. "Now, when you are ready, please tell me what happened." She turned in time to see Midoriya had just chugged down a large paper cup of water, gasping for air when he finished. "Okay," he said. "Well, we were with Mr. Kendo in Gym Omega and X." Izuku watched from the sidelines of Gym Omega, which was one of the weirdest gyms the school had. The main floor of the gym was composed of 4 parts, each with a heavily matted circle in its center that was about 40 meters in diameter. While they looked like the normal sort of padding you could find in most schools, they seemed like they were made from a super shock absorbent material. But that wasn't what was so weird and, honestly, freaky about this gym. It was what was lined against the walls. Countless tubes were placed one after another with only a keypad separating them. Inside each of them was a different type of robot that put the ones in the entrance exam to shame. The first few looked like those old pre-quirk boxing toys made real, with thicker armor. Then there were more complex ones that held weapons. There was one that had 6 arms, each with a sword sharpened to perfection. But then there were the ones who looked human. As in, Izuku thought for a moment that the school had kidnapped people and stuck them in these tubes because that's how lifelike they appeared. What's more, many of them were women whom the creator had decided to give alluring features as well as skin-tight outfits. Sure, there were a few guys in there, but the number was obviously disproportionate. And some of them were dressed in barely anything, with the last 2 being the worst. One was a woman whose outfit made her look like she worked at a strip club, while the other was a woman dressed only in her lingerie. Shinso, who was sitting next to Izuku, had noticed this as well. The look on the purple-haired teen when he had first laid eyes on the robots mirrored his friend's. Shock mixed with a blush before quickly turning away. Now the pair sat there stiffly, beads of sweat forming on their brows, as they forced themselves to watch what was going on in the middle of one of the rings, and not linger on the many female-looking robots behind them. Standing in the middle of the circle was Mr. Kendo, seemingly alone. His arms were outstretched in front of him, almost like he was ready to grab something but holding off while his feet were spread. For several long moments, he just stood there, appearing to any passerby who suddenly walked in that the man had simply zoned out and was staring into nothingness. However, both boys knew better. Then, Mr. Kendo suddenly and swiftly spun around, reaching out with one hand. He seemed to pull Toga out of thin air before tossing her to the side, as if she were a rag doll. The vampiric girl, dressed in the same blue gym uniform as both the boys, landed with a thud before bouncing back up to her feet. "Very good, young lady," said Mr. Kendo as he moved out of his fighting stance. Turning to the girl, he gave her a thumbs up with a smile. "I think I might have what you are looking for." As Toga tilted her head slightly with a curious expression, Izuku just beamed. "It was a wise move calling this man," commented Albion, once more using the tone that Izuku had come to associate with him, nodding his head. "If Toga is going to thrive in the hero course, she will need a fighting style, should there ever come a time when weapons are off the table. The same goes for that Shinso boy. This will benefit them both greatly." "I know," replied Izuku. "I'm just glad that Mr. Kendo agreed to do this." As he thought this, the teen recalled how this had all come about. With all the training for the sports festival, Izuku had noticed that his 2 newest friends needed additional help. While Toga was quick, nimble, and stealthy, he felt like this would only get her so far, especially when she didn't have one of her training weapons. As for Shinso, the boy just needed to know how to fight. Izuku was doing his best to teach him. But there was a world of difference between someone like himself, who was still somewhat of a novice, and a true master. Something that Izuku was humble enough to admit to not only himself, but also Shinso. So, why not ask the man who had taught him? The master who knew more fighting styles than anyone he knew. There had only been one slight problem. Toga couldn't leave the school for right now. Apparently, there were still some details that needed to be fine-tuned with her agreement, So until she began her internship, the blood drinker was forced to remain on campus. Izuku had spoken to his martial arts teacher about this, asking if it was all right for him to give a special lesson to his friends. Oddly enough, the man agreed to this without much convincing. Either he was hoping to get some additional students once the sports festival was over, or the man was just very bored that day. Now then, began Mr. Kendo's voice, the sound bringing Izuku out of his thoughts. Now he watched as the taller man turned to face Toga. I believe I have the perfect fighting style for you. Watch carefully now. With that, the man struck an odd pose that Izuku had never seen before. One foot was placed in front of the other, though they weren't as firmly planted as Izuku had seen before. And with his hands brought up with the fingers pointing downward gave the impression of a man sneaking through a house. Then, in the blink of an eye, the man vanished completely. Before either Izuku or Shinso could turn their heads to look around, they heard Himiko crying out in pain. The two turned their focus over to where the girl had been standing to find that she was now lying face down on the ground with Mr. Kendo standing above her. What I just showed you is a heightened form of your disappearing trick, Mr. Kendo, as Toga slowly got up onto her feet. Thought her legs did look a little shaky. This is a fighting style that was created completely by accident along with a sister style by a man back in the pre-quirk era. It's called Yumaisen Ken. Mr. Kendo then paused, a foul look appearing on his face before raising a fist to cough into. When I say accidentally, I mean that both styles were originally interoperated as treating the body as a house and using different methods to break in. One style uses brute force to knock down the front gate, aka your opponent's defenses, in order to get inside. Usually starting with a loud cry to catch them off guard, followed by swinging your arms to bat away your opponent's arms and finishing with a powerful kick to the chest. Yumaisen Ken, however, has you sneaking in through the back to strike quickly and repeatedly. It wasn't until later that it was discovered that both styles were meant to literally break into people's homes to rob them. Everyone, including Albion, sweat dropped at that. So it's exactly what I've been doing this whole time, said Toga with a slight frown. Yes and no, responded Mr. Kendo. While the techniques were originally sealed away, they eventually were brought back along with a slew of various fighting styles during the chaos caused by the emergence of quirks. Whether it was used by people who wanted to fight those with greater power than them, or simply those with quirks who needed to defend themselves, people were doing whatever they could to secure their own survival. However, as time went by, bits and pieces of these techniques were lost to time or perverted when put on the internet. Now they exist as mere shadows of their former glory. The method you have been using to vanish from sight is a watered-down version of the original. Izuku watched as Toga, upon hearing that, visibly slumped. And it wasn't like he could blame her. That trick was the one that she was most proud of. So hearing the truth about it was no doubt disheartening. With that said, continued Mr. Kendo, you have a firm handle on the basics. I believe that learning this style would be most suited for you. Perhaps, with some hard work, you can bring it to a whole new level that the original creator never could. Izuku could see Toga blushing from the praise before giving the man a nod that showed off both her fangs. With that done, Mr. Kendo called Shinso over to begin the process of finding the purple-haired teen, a style that was best suited for him. With a sigh, the brainwashing teen rose before walking to the middle of the mat with his hands in his pockets. At the same time, Himiko practically skipped over to Izuku before twirling around and sitting down next to him with a flourish. Once her behind was on the ground, the girl brought her legs up so that they were pressed against her chest. At first, the pair sat in silence as they watched the other two people in the room talk, only occasionally glancing at the other before turning their heads away. Both doing their best to hide the nervous expressions on their faces, as well as the light tint of red coating their cheeks. Finally, Toga broke the silence. Hey, Midoriya, she began in a slightly nervous tone. I just want to say thanks. For, everything. It's fine, replied Izuku, his eyes moving downward to stare at his shoes. When I was younger, I wished that more people out there could have helped me out. It didn't need to be anything big. Maybe just a little encouragement, a kind word, or just not laughing at my dreams. So I just want to give what I never got. Because you're actually quirkless, asked Toga. Though her words were spoken softly, Izuku reacted as though she had screamed them from the top of the school building, practically jumping to his feet in a panic. He then turned to the girl who was still sitting there, giving him a shy smile. My grandpa used to tell me stories about the sacred gears. I basically grew up hearing all about the boosted gear and divine dividing. I've seen you training your quirk, and Pony told me about how amazing it is that you managed to get this far after finally being strong enough to use your quirk. Plus, my Aunt Asia is a member of the staff here. so you really shouldn't be surprised that I know about it. Oh right, replied Izuku, his heart rate slowly returning to normal yet still a little nervous. Are you going to tell anyone? At that, Himiko let out a small laugh. Yeah, like anyone would believe me if I did tell them the truth, she said before shaking her head. No. But if the day ever comes that you need to tell them, I'll back you up. Besides, it's not like I really blame you for lying to them. It's not easy being an outsider, wanting people to just accept you. For another long moment, the two sat there in silence as they watched Mr. Kendo teaching Shinso a move. While Itsuka's father held up his hands, palms out towards the brainwasher while also circling him, Izuku's thoughts went toward what she had said. He knew a little of her past, but only in broad strokes and none of the finer details. Was this some sort of invitation to ask? No, it's not, said Izuku at last. Though, it was probably harder for you. I mean, sure, my mom never really believed that I could be a hero even back when I was 4. But she still wanted the best for me. Having your parents suppress a part of yourself like that must have been suffocating. Himiko let out a humorless chuckle, her eyes becoming dark as she averted her gaze. Oh, it was pretty much the same, she said. When I was younger, my parents had already written me off as a monster. All because I found a dead bird and was drinking its blood. But they believed that I had gone out and killed it. Seriously. How was I supposed to do that? I was a little girl. And what they did to me, going to see people to teach me quirk suppression and change the way I acted, it was all because they wanted the best for me. They even made me stop seeing Grandpa because he was a bad influence in their eyes. With that, Toga let out a heavy sigh that seemed to hold all of her frustration. Sorry for dumping all of this on you. It just bugs me that they never saw anything from my point of view. Drinking people's blood was just the way I showed how much I loved them, wanted to be more like them. Everyone else got to express the way they loved each other in public in so many different ways. But me, when I did it, it was creepy. By the time she was done saying this, Izuku had brought a hand to his chin in a classic thinking pose. You know, that makes a bit of sense. I mean, drinking blood as a sign of love. I sort of get it, said Izuku, causing Toga's head to quickly snap in his direction. With her mouth hanging agape, Izuku continued. Blood is, both symbolically and literally, life. And it holds the most important details of a person. So, in a way, you could say that sharing blood with someone else could be seen as sharing some of your life with that person. That's it, cried Toga, spinning her body around so that she was now on all fours. Her expression had changed, looking so happily excited, while bringing her face so close to Izuku's that she could pounce on him at any moment. You get it. You really get it. It's what I want to do. I want that intimacy. To be as close as possible to the people I love. So much so that I can become them because, to me, they're cute. Please tell me you feel the same way. At first, Izuku prepared himself for the heartbreak in Himiko when he told her no. Yet, as his mouth opened, no sound came out. For several long breaths, no sound could escape him despite his mouth moving while an old memory returned. He then visibly relaxed. I used to, Izuku admitted, while Toga got back into a sitting position. Only now she was sitting on her legs right next to Izuku, so that their shoulders were touching. I wouldn't call it love, but there was someone I looked up to. When I saw him, that's when I was filled with more hope for the future than any time else during the day. And I wanted to be just like him. So much so that all my sketches for hero costumes were trying to match him in appearance. My hero names were just knockoffs of his. And when I went to learn how to fight, I wanted to do it in the same manner as him. I was even willing to completely change my body type just so I could do it. You said used to, said Toga, a crestfallen expression appearing on her face. What changed? I finally met other people that I grew to admire, replied Izuku almost instantly. They basically helped me realize that the way I have has worth. And if I continued to just copy someone else, that was all I would ever be. A poor imitation of that person. So, instead, I'd rather just take the best parts of the people I love and admire to carry with me. The lessons they taught me, what they inspired in me. That way, they'll always be a part of me as I move forward. Izuku then turned to Toga, nervously placing a hand on her shoulder as he looked into her now wide-eyed expression. Maybe you could try that. Taking on the spirit of the people you think are cute and love. That way, you'll always have a part of them with you as well. Besides, I don't think you need to turn into them because you're already really cute just as you are now. Izuku watched as Himiko's jaw dropped, so much so that he could see all her fangs. Then, starting from the neck, her face began to turn a shade of red that Izuku had never seen before, while her eyes became nothing more than dark spirals. By the time the red reached her forehead, The blonde's head was flung back with steam, escaping her mouth, hair, and ears. Then she fell backward onto the mat with a very scared Izuku rising to his feet in panic. X. And that's what happened, exclaimed Izuku, fidgeting as he stood there with tears in his eyes. Can you figure out what's wrong with her? Will she be okay? Oh, she'll be fine, said Asia as she held up one of Himiko's arms while pretending to check her pulse. In truth, she knew that the girl was fine the moment she laid eyes on that face. Even unconscious, Himiko had a dopey grin with blood leaking from her nose. She just wanted to hear what had happened to put the girl in this state. X. A few days later. How about this one? Toga turned her head to look over at Pony, who was holding up a tablet. On the screen, there was a man dressed in a red trench coat, yellow sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat that matched the jacket, and a suit underneath. For a moment, all the girl could do was look between the image of the anime character before looking at the excited face of the American girl, and then back to the image before sighing. I don't think so. Not cute enough, said Toga, wincing as May continued her work. Namely her hero costume. While it would take a while to get something made, the support course could whip her up something to allow her to use her quirk during the upcoming sports festival. That way, when she did change, her cute naked body wouldn't be broadcasted all over the world when the changes melted off her. There were currently only 2 people right now that she wanted to reserve that right for, and one of them was in the room with her. Pony, in Himiko's opinion, was a major cutie. How could anyone not find her expression adorable with those big blue eyes and that long flowing golden hair? Not to mention those horns and tail. But beyond that, she was one of the few people in her class who could best understand Toga as feeling like an outsider. Not only did she have a mutant quirk from a country that heavily discriminated against people of that type, but now she was a foreigner. But despite all that, she was still super friendly, which made her all the cuter to Himiko. Even now as she huffed, she still looked so adorable as she went to look for another design for Himiko's hero costume. I thought it looked good, she said softly. You could have gone for the old abridged version of him. You would have looked awesome and been super funny. Toga, in response, just blew a raspberry at her. Sorry, but I'm not going for something that makes me look like I'm a hitman vampire. I'm looking for something, well, cute. Not as in all pink and bubbly and something that will fit all the wonderful babies I have planned for her, exclaimed May. Sighing, Pony shook her head as she swiped away at her tablet. Well, that was the last cool-looking anime vampire who wasn't set in a high school anime, she said. So, maybe we could look at some old mobile games for ideas. There was this one called Azur Lane that used to do a bunch of vampire and Halloween skins for their characters. Maybe we could use one of them for an idea. Before Himiko could point out that she didn't know if she wanted to go with a vampire-inspired costume, the horned American girl had pulled up the images. As Pony swiped the screen to show them off, Himiko had to admit that some of them looked really cute. Especially the ones belonging to a fleet called the Crimson Axis. But none of them really stood. Wait, yelled Himiko, startling both of the other girls. Go back. Instantly Pony turned the tablet over, swiping the screen so that she came back to the last image before frowning. But that's her original skin, commented the girl as she showed the image to Himiko again, with May looking on in slight interest. Though that might have had more to do with the gear on the girl's hands, rather than the outfit and the character as a whole. She's such a cutie, was all Himiko could say. Besides, that outfit is just my style. All I need to do is make a few changes here and there. Maybe some gear that Hatsune could make for me. Oh, make you some special babies, asked May, her grin widening. Please do tell. With that, Toga went into detail about the changes she wanted. To help aid her, May brought in a digital sketchpad. The original image was brought up, with the support student using the electric pen to make the adjustments that Himiko wanted as well as designing the gear that the girl thought would suit her best. And when they were done, Himiko was excited for the day when she could wear it.